She had a limp, a clipboard, and a secret that would bring an entire hospital to its knees. The morning Olivia Marsh walked into Suncrest Valley Medical Center for the last time as a supply nurse, she already knew something was wrong. She'd felt it the way a person feels a shift in air pressure before a storm, not in her bones, not in her gut, but in the specific silence of a building that's decided it no longer needs you. The attending physicians didn't look at her, the charge nurse wouldn't meet her eyes, and Dr. Raymond Holt, Chief of Emergency Services, stood at the nurse's station with his arms crossed and a termination letter in his hand. He smiled when he handed it to her. That was the part she wouldn't forget. If you've been watching for a while, you already know what kind of story this is. If you're new here, stay until the end. Like this video, drop the name of your city in the comments and let me see just how far this story has traveled. Because what happened inside Suncrest Valley Medical Center over the next 72 hours is the kind of thing you don't believe until you see it with your own eyes. The letter was dated 3 days prior. Olivia stood in the hallway just outside the nurse's station and read it twice. Not because she didn't understand the words, but because she wanted to make sure she understood the reasoning, or lack of it. Restructuring of departmental roles, redundancy in non-clinical support staff. It was 3 paragraphs of corporate language carefully assembled to mean one thing without ever saying it directly. We don't want you here anymore, and we found a way to make that legal. She folded the letter in half, then in half again. Then she tucked it into the front pocket of her scrub top and said, "Okay." That was it. That was the whole response. Dr. Holt had clearly expected something else. His posture shifted, a small tell, the kind she'd learned to read in environments where everyone had a weapon and everyone was lying. He straightened up from the counter, his expression cycling through a brief moment of confusion before settling back into satisfaction. HR will walk you through the exit process. You'll need to surrender your badge before noon. "I know the process," Olivia said. She didn't move. She was looking past him at the emergency bay, where the morning shift was already in controlled chaos. 2 chest pains and a blunt force trauma from a pre-dawn car accident, all arriving within the same 40-minute window. The night crew had been running since 3 in the morning. She could see it in the way Nurse Delia Ruiz was holding her left shoulder, the compensation posture of someone who'd been lifting patients alone because there weren't enough bodies to split the work. "Is there something else?" Holt asked. "Bay 3, Olivia said. "The trauma patient from the MVA. His pressure cuff is on the wrong arm. He has a proximal humerus fracture on that side. The readings are off by at least 20 points. Holt turned to look. He turned back. "Our staff is fully capable of—" "I know they are. I'm telling you the cuff is wrong." She looked at him directly. "It's not a criticism. It happens fast in a multi-patient intake. But if you're basing his hemodynamic status on that number, you're working with bad data." A beat of silence. Holt said nothing. He turned and walked to Bay 3. 30 seconds later, she heard him tell the resident to move the cuff. She didn't wait for any acknowledgement that didn't come. She walked to the supply room, pulled a cardboard box from the shelf, and started packing her things. Her locker held less than she expected. A spare pair of sneakers. A water bottle she'd been meaning to replace for 6 months. 3 granola bars, one of which had expired in February. A small personal first aid kit she'd assembled herself. Military-grade supplies quietly tucked inside a standard retail container. Nothing that would draw questions. And a photograph she'd kept face down since her first week at Suncrest Valley, 3 years ago. She turned the photograph over now. 6 people in desert camo, squinting into a brutal sun somewhere that didn't make it onto civilian maps. She was in the center, shorter than the men on either side of her, her posture completely different from the way she carried herself here. Straight, easy, the kind of confidence that doesn't perform itself. The leg hadn't happened yet. Or it had happened, and that photo was from just before. She'd had the timeline compressed into a single image in her memory for so long that she sometimes couldn't locate where one thing ended and another began. She put the photo in the box face down again. The supply room door opened and Delia leaned in, still holding her shoulder. "Is it true? They're actually letting you go?" "Restructuring," Olivia said. That's ridiculous. You caught 3 medication errors last month alone. Who's going to—" Delia stopped herself. She had 12 years of knowing better than to fight the hospital's administrative decisions openly. "I'm sorry, Olivia. That's all I can say. I'm genuinely sorry." "Don't be. Olivia closed the box. How's your shoulder? It's fine. It's not. You're compensating on the left when you lift. You've got rotator cuff inflammation at minimum. Get someone to cover your patient transfers today and go see orthopedics on your break. Delia stared at her. You're being fired and you're still... I'm not being fired, I'm being restructured. Olivia almost smiled. There's a difference, apparently. She picked up the box, adjusted her weight onto her right leg. Automatic, practiced, something she didn't think about anymore, and walked out of the supply room for the last time. She made it as far as the main lobby before the first thing went wrong. The second thing would come later. The second thing would change everything. The first thing was Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb was 53 years old, a contract electrician who'd been doing exterior maintenance on the hospital's west wing since 6 that morning. He came through the lobby doors at 9:17 a.m., moving wrong. That was the only way to describe it, the specific wrongness of a person who's trying to act fine and failing at a molecular level. Olivia saw it from 20 feet away. The pallor, the careful, deliberate pace of someone managing pain. His left hand pressed against his sternum like he was trying to hold something in. She set her box down on the lobby bench. She walked over to him. "Sir." She kept her voice low and even, the tone calibrated specifically to not increase anyone's panic. "I need you to stop walking and talk to me for a second." He looked at her with the polite, slightly annoyed expression of a man who thinks he's fine. "I'm just going to the front desk. I need to tell them I have to..." He stopped. Something crossed his face that had nothing to do with annoyance. "When did the pain start?" "It's not..." He pressed harder against his chest. "It's indigestion. I had a big breakfast. Does it go into your arm, your jaw?" A pause, long enough to be an answer. "Little bit. My left arm's been... yeah." "Okay. Come sit down." She guided him to the nearest bench, not the one with her box, the one 6 feet closer to the ER entrance. She kept one hand on his elbow, monitoring his gait, his weight shift, the tremor she could feel beginning to develop in his forearm. "I'm a nurse. I'm going to call for help right now. I need you to stay calm and keep breathing normally." "I really think it's just..." "You might be right," she said, which was not something she believed, but was the correct thing to say to keep his cortisol from spiking further. She looked up toward the ER check-in desk and made direct eye contact with the triage nurse, a second-year named Garrett, and gave him a single clean hand signal she'd learned in a context that had nothing to do with hospital corridors. Garrett was up and moving before she'd finished the gesture. What happened in the next 4 minutes was a study in the difference between training and instinct. The triage team came out with a wheelchair and a portable monitor. Olivia provided a concise handoff. Male, mid-50s, acute chest pain radiating to the left arm and jaw, onset approximately 30 to 40 minutes prior, based on symptom progression. No loss of consciousness, diaphoresis developing. She'd taken his radial pulse manually while she was talking to him. Rate, rhythm, quality, all of it cataloged without him noticing. Garrett looked at her. "Are you working today?" "I didn't see you on the..." "No," she said. "I'm not working today." She watched them take Marcus Webb through the ER doors. She stood there long enough to see the team move with the right level of urgency. Not panicked, not complacent. Then she walked back to the lobby bench, picked up her cardboard box, and surrendered her badge at the front desk. The woman behind the desk, a young administrator named Tricia, who'd always been pleasant to her, looked at the badge, then at Olivia, then back at the badge. "I'm sorry to see you go," Tricia said quietly. "Take care of yourself," Olivia told her. She walked out through the automatic doors into the dry Arizona morning. The parking lot was already hot at 9:30 a.m., the pavement radiating a shimmer of stored heat upward into air that smelled like dust and distance. She loaded her box into the back of her truck, a 10-year-old Tacoma with a cracked dashboard and a driver's seat worn smooth on the left side, and sat there for a moment with the door open and one foot on the running board. Mesa Flats, Arizona. Population 46,000. One hospital. 2 urgent care clinics. A VA satellite office 30 miles east that was perpetually understaffed and perpetually apologizing for it. She'd come here 3 years ago because it was quiet, because it was remote, because the staffing coordinator at Suncrest Valley had been desperate enough not to ask too many questions about the gap in her employment history, and because the desert was the kind of place where a person could exist without being looked at too closely. She hadn't planned to stay. She'd stayed anyway. She pulled the termination letter out of her pocket, unfolded it, read it one more time. "We appreciate your contributions to Suncrest Valley Medical Center and wish you well in your future endeavors." She put it back in her pocket and started the truck. She hadn't made it out of the parking lot when her phone rang. Not her personal phone. The other one. The secondary device she carried at the bottom of her bag inside a clean room pouch. The one with a number she'd never given to anyone at Suncrest Valley. The one that had not received a single call or message in 26 months. She stopped the truck, looked at the screen. The number wasn't a number. It was a string of digits formatted in a specific pattern that she recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting. A pattern she'd memorized 12 years ago during an orientation that had no paperwork, in a building that didn't appear on any base map. She stared at it for 4 full seconds. Then she answered. The voice on the other end was male, late 40s, the flat effect of someone who has been trained to deliver information without editorial. "Authentication code required." She gave it. A brief silence. Then, "Raven 1, confirm status." She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Confirmed. "Stand by for priority transmission." The line clicked. There was a 2-second burst of encrypted audio she wasn't meant to decode in real time. She'd received the decoded text version in 30 seconds to the same device. She waited. The parking lot was quiet. A hospital van pulled in 2 rows over. A man in a white coat walked across the asphalt with his phone to his ear, not looking at her. The text came through. She read it once. She didn't read it twice. She put the truck in park, opened the door, and sat with both feet on the asphalt for a moment, processing. The message was 8 words of operational language that collapsed into a single meaning. Something had gone wrong, and they needed her, and the window was narrow. 26 months. 26 months of supply orders and medication logs and a limp that people treated like an expiration date. 26 months of catching errors that other people got credit for fixing. 26 months of being called a liability in staff meetings by people who couldn't start an IV under fire at altitude in the dark. She put the truck back in drive. She did not go home. She drove 3 miles east on the state route, turned onto a county access road that most locals didn't know existed, and parked behind a disused agricultural building that had long since stopped being used for anything agricultural. It was the kind of instinct that didn't require justification. She needed somewhere to think that wasn't visible from the road, and she'd scoped this location in her first month in Mesa Flats, the way she scoped every location, automatically, without deciding to. She read the message again. The operational details were sparse by design. Need to know at this stage, which meant the picture would fill in when she made contact with whoever was being sent to her. What she had was enough. A special operations element had been compromised during an extraction in a training corridor that had turned into something other than a training corridor. Multiple critical casualties. Evacuation in progress. And for reasons the message didn't specify, reasons she suspected had to do with proximity, with her specific skill set, and with the fact that someone somewhere had clearly been tracking her location for longer than she'd realized. The extraction route passed through Mesa Flats. Through Mesa Flats, within range of Suncrest Valley Medical Center, the hospital that had terminated her employment at 9:03 that morning. She sat with that for a moment. The irony was not lost on her. It didn't amuse her exactly, but it sat in a specific compartment of her mind alongside other things that were true and strange and useless to argue with. She opened the truck's back seat and moved her cardboard box aside. Underneath, bolted to the floor of the cab behind a steel panel that looked like factory installation but wasn't, was a locked case she had opened exactly once since arriving in Mesa Flats. During a drill she ran alone, at 4 in the morning, in the parking lot of a closed rest stop, to make sure everything still worked, and she still knew how to use it. She entered the combination, opened the case. She didn't take anything out. Not yet. She just needed to confirm it was there, confirm the contents were intact, and close it again. It was. They were. She did. Then she drove back to the hospital. She parked in the visitor lot this time, which felt strange. She'd never used the visitor lot, and walked in through the main entrance without her badge. The security guard at the door, a young man named Ferris, who'd always been polite to her, looked up. "Ms. Marsh, you're not—" "I know. I'm here to see someone in the emergency department. Personal visit." She held his gaze long enough for it to not be a question. Ferris hesitated. He looked at his screen. He looked at her. In the 18 months he'd worked security at Suncrest Valley, Olivia Marsh had brought him ibuprofen when he had a migraine, told him his blood pressure reading looked off, and suggested he see his primary care doctor. He'd gone. She'd been right. He was now on medication. And once, on a night shift, talked him through the steps to stabilize a visitor who went into anaphylactic shock before the clinical staff could respond. He handed her a visitor sticker. "Sign in on the tablet." She signed in and walked through. The emergency department at 10:45 a.m. was in a predictable mid-morning rhythm. Busier than the early hours, not yet at the afternoon surge. She moved through the outer corridor with the natural pace of someone who knows where they're going, which in a hospital is most of the permission you need. She wasn't there for a patient. She needed to talk to Delia. She found her in the medication room, drawing up syringes with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done it 10,000 times. Delia looked up, startled, then immediately suspicious. The expression of a nurse who knows that when a recently fired colleague comes back to the hospital 90 minutes later, something has gone sideways. "What's wrong?" Delia asked. "Delia, nothing yet." Olivia came in and let the door fall shut behind her. "I need to ask you something, and I need you not to make it weird." Delia set down the syringe. "Okay. If something happened, a mass casualty event, unexpected, coming in fast, what's the current trauma capacity on this floor? Not the official number, the real number, tonight, right now, with the staff you actually have." Delia stared at her. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because I need to know." "Olivia?" "Delia. Real number." A long pause. Delia was not a person who scared easily. She'd been doing emergency nursing for 12 years, and she had the specific fearlessness of someone who has worked real emergencies and knows what they look like. But the look on Olivia's face was doing something to her. It wasn't panic. It wasn't urgency in the performed sense. It was the flat, clear attention of someone calculating. 4 trauma bays running full, Delia said. "Maybe a 5th if we convert the procedure room. We're down 2 trauma nurses," Kirkland called out. "Patel is on restricted duty. If it hit right now, we'd be managing on skeleton crew." "What's the blood bank situation?" "Why, blood bank. O-neg is low. We had a big weekend. We're waiting on a shipment that's supposed to come tomorrow." She took a step closer. "Olivia, what do you know?" "I don't know anything for certain," which was true. The message had been operational language, not confirmed intelligence. There was a difference. "But I want you to do something for me without asking me why. Call the blood bank right now and ask them to prioritize that shipment. Tell them you have reason to believe you may have a high-volume trauma event in the next 12 hours and you need the O-neg on hand. They'll want a physician authorization. Then get one. Go to Holt if you have to. Tell him it's a supply precaution. Tell him whatever you need to tell him to make it happen." Delia was quiet for a moment. "You're scaring me." "Good," Olivia said. Not to be cruel, she meant it as information. Fear in the appropriate context was a calibrated response. "Make the call. And if anything unusual comes over the radio dispatch tonight, anything involving military aircraft or a non-civilian emergency in the county, call me." She wrote her personal number on a prescription notepad tear-off and handed it over. Delia took it, looked at her. "Who are you?" Olivia opened the medication room door. "Someone who used to work here." She spent the next 4 hours doing what she was trained to do in the interval between an alert and an operation. She prepared, and she did not catastrophize. She went home, a 1-story rental house on the east edge of Mesa Flats, flat-roofed, the kind of aggressively anonymous structure that estate agents described as cozy and tenants used as a temporary solution they'd stopped questioning. She brought the case inside from the truck. She went through it methodically, taking inventory, checking expiration dates on medications she'd stored legally, with documentation she maintained through a civilian contractor she'd never met face-to-face. She ate something. Protein, real food. Not because she was hungry, but because performance required fuel. And she'd learned that lesson in a way she couldn't unlearn. She did not touch alcohol. She did not call anyone she knew personally. She ran through the message again in her mind, extracting the architecture of it. The extraction route suggested the helicopters would come in from the northwest, which placed the likely approach over the county highway corridor. If Suncrest Valley was the designated landing point, and the message had been clear that it was, that the hospital had been selected as the stabilization site, then the ETA, based on extraction distance and standard rotary wing transit speed in this kind of terrain, was somewhere between 8 and 14 hours from the time of the message. She'd received the message at 9:47 a.m. That put the window between 5:47 p.m. and 11:47 p.m. She looked at her watch. It was 2:14 p.m. She lay down on her bed, not because she expected to sleep, but because rest was resource management, and stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the last time she'd gotten a message like that. She thought about it anyway. The last time had been a Tuesday, which she remembered because she'd been scheduled for a debrief on Thursday and had allowed herself to begin thinking about what she'd order for dinner at the hotel near the base, which was the kind of small domestic thought that indicated a person has begun to feel safe. She'd been leading a combat trauma element through a training exercise that had converted into a real event somewhere around the 40-minute mark, when the radio traffic shifted in register and the shooting started. She didn't like to count the minutes of that day. She'd counted them obsessively in the first year afterward, and had concluded that counting didn't change anything. She knew what had happened and roughly in what order. She knew what she'd done right and specifically what she'd done wrong, and she'd reviewed both lists so many times that they were no longer a source of information, only a source of noise. What she remembered most clearly, not as a narrative, just as a physical fact, was the weight of a soldier who was larger than her, much larger, and the way the ground had felt under her knees when she went down with him, and the specific quality of concentration that had taken over her body when she stopped being able to feel her left leg properly and understood that this was going to hurt very much later, and that later was not now. Later had been 11 months of surgical recovery and physical therapy and a legal process she'd had no control over and an administrative determination that her direct field service was concluded. She'd been offered 3 different desk positions. She'd declined all of them. She'd taken her medical separation and driven west until the landscape looked like it couldn't care less about her, and she'd stopped in Mesa Flats because she'd run out of reasons not to. She hadn't expected to be needed again. She'd been wrong about that. Her phone, the secondary phone, buzzed at 6:22 p.m. Not a call. A location ping, encoded, which translated to a GPS coordinate 2.3 miles north of Suncrest Valley Medical Center. Confirmation that the route was holding. Confirmation that they were coming. She was in her truck before the ping finished processing. She drove back toward the hospital through a desert evening that had turned the sky into shades of amber and copper, the light doing the particular thing it did out here at this hour that made everything look both beautiful and brutally exposed. She didn't look at the sky. She drove. She pulled into the hospital's north access road, a maintenance route, not open to the public, but she'd learned its gate code in her first month because knowing secondary access routes was not optional, it was structural, and parked where she had a clear line of sight to the rooftop, the courtyard, and the main ER bay. She sat. She waited. At 7:04 p.m., the power to the hospital's communication systems went out. Not the building power, but the lights stayed on. Backup generators kicked in seamlessly for the clinical equipment. But external communications, the hospital's primary network, the phone trunks, the radio channels that connected them to dispatch. All of it, simultaneously, dark. Inside, she knew the staff would be scrambling. Protocols for communication failure existed but were rarely practiced. People would be anxious. Dr. Holt would be issuing instructions in his particular voice of authority that sounded confident and moved slowly. Delia would be the one actually getting things done. She pulled out the secondary phone and sent a single encoded confirmation back to the last ping. On site. Ready. The response came in 11 seconds. Inbound. ETA 9 minutes. Prepare receiving. She got out of the truck. She opened the case. She put on the tactical vest she hadn't worn in 26 months. It still fit. She'd made sure of that during that 4 a.m. drill at the rest stop, with the kind of private thoroughness that nobody knew about because nobody had been there to see it. She clipped her medical kit to the right side, checked her hands, steady, which was not something she'd ever taken for granted. It was something she'd worked for. She checked the sky to the northwest. Nothing yet. Then the ground moved. Not an earthquake. A frequency. A resonance that started in the soles of her feet and traveled upward through her skeleton before her ears caught the sound that was causing it. Rotor wash. Multiple aircraft, heavy lift, still below the visible horizon, but close enough to feel. She heard the hospital behind her go very quiet in the way that large buildings go quiet when everyone inside them stops talking at the same time. She heard someone inside, through the walls, muffled but audible, say, "What is that sound?" The first helicopter crested the ridge to the northwest, and the lights hit the sky like a second sun, and everything that had been quiet became very loud, very fast. 4 aircraft, not transport. The profile was wrong for pure transport. These were configured for both escort and medical evacuation, a specific combination she recognized before she'd fully processed what she was seeing. They came in low and fast over the hospital complex, the rotor blast sending the courtyard landscaping into chaos and blowing out a section of the emergency department's exterior signage in a cascade of plastic letters. The lead aircraft broke from formation and dropped toward the hospital's main courtyard. Olivia walked toward it. She was crossing the access road when the ER doors burst open behind her, and 3 hospital staff ran out into the courtyard, hands over their ears, looking at the sky with expressions that ranged from terror to pure disbelief. One of them was the security guard Ferris. One of them was a hospitalist physician she recognized but didn't know well. The third was Holt. He saw her. He did not understand what he was seeing. "Marsh!" he shouted over the rotor noise. What is this? What's happening? Why are you—" The helicopter touched down. The side door opened before the skids had fully settled. A Marine in full combat kit dropped to the courtyard concrete and scanned the perimeter in a single practiced motion. Not aggressive, tactical. And then a second Marine was out. And then the ramp on the lead aircraft dropped, and Olivia could see inside, and what she saw snapped everything else into a very clean silence in her head. There were 9 of them. At least 9 that she could count from here, some on litters, some in collapsed positions against the fuselage. One with a field tourniquet on his thigh that had clearly been applied hours ago and needed to be reassessed immediately. One whose chest movement she didn't like at all. The Marine who'd come off the door first turned and saw her. He was young, 24, 25. He'd been told to look for someone. She could see it in the way he processed her. The vest, the kit, the stillness she was able to hold despite everything happening around her. "Are you Raven 1?" he shouted. Behind her, she heard Holt say, what did he call her? She didn't look at Holt. "Yes," she said. "Commander Vasquez needs you on that aircraft immediately. We have 2 critical and 1 expectant, and they need to be walked back from expectant before we transport." "How long in transit to the ship?" 43 minutes at current speed." She was already moving toward the ramp. "Who administered the chest decompression on the one in the 3rd position?" "Flight medic, 20 minutes ago." "Supplies on board?" "What you see, we've been running low since—" "I have a kit." She patted the case she was carrying. "Get your team to open the ER bay and start moving litters. We're going to need the procedure room converted to trauma. Tell them 4 bays minimum. Tell whoever's in charge in there to get their blood bank on the phone right now if they haven't already." She was on the ramp. She was inside the helicopter. The noise was enormous and the space was tight. And it smelled the way these things always smelled. Metal and antiseptic and the specific iron smell underneath everything that she'd learned not to react to. And a young Marine on the nearest litter grabbed her wrist with the grip of someone who is scared and trying not to show it. "You a doctor?" he asked. She looked at him. He was maybe 22. He had a field dressing on his left shoulder and a gash above his eyebrow that had been closed with what looked like improvised butterfly strips. "Nurse," she said. He didn't let go of her wrist. "You going to be able to fix us?" She looked around the aircraft, at the casualties, at the equipment she had, at the space she had to work in and the time she had to work with. "Yes," she said. Not because she was certain, because certainty in this moment was the least useful thing she could offer him, and what he needed instead was something to hold on to. She unclipped her kit. She got to work. Behind her, through the open ramp door, she could hear the hospital courtyard erupting. Holt's voice raised in confusion, other voices, the systematic noise of people being put into motion. She heard one of the Marines outside giving rapid instructions in the tone that meant, "This is not a request." And she heard, just before the ramp closed, Holt say to someone, to the air, to no one specifically, in the voice of a man encountering something his whole framework doesn't have room for, "Who the hell is she?" The ramp sealed. The helicopter lifted. Olivia didn't hear his question answered because she was already 3 steps into a procedure that had to work, in a space that barely had room for it, on a patient who was running out of time. The helicopter banked northwest into the dark, and the lights of Mesa Flats fell away below. The first thing she did was wrong. Not dangerously wrong, not the kind of wrong that kills someone, but wrong enough that she caught it herself 3 seconds in and corrected without breaking rhythm, which was the only grace available in a space like this. She'd reached for the chest seal in the left pocket of her kit, and her hand had gone to the right pocket instead. Muscle memory from a layout she'd used in a different life with a different configuration, and she'd had to pause and recalibrate, and those 3 seconds felt enormous in the way that only happens when someone's lung is partially collapsed, and you're the only person in the aircraft who can do anything about it. Lance Corporal Danny Reyes saw. She'd gotten his name from the dog tag she'd checked in the first 30 seconds. Always check the dog tag, always have a name. Was 20 years old and from somewhere outside of Tucson, which she knew because he'd told her, unprompted, while she was cutting away his field dressing. People talked when they were scared. She'd learned not to stop them unless the talking was using resources they didn't have. "My mom's going to lose it," Reyes said. "She's not going to lose it," Olivia said, working, "because you're going to be fine. You don't know my mom." Fair point. She got the seal placed, held pressure, watched his chest. "Breathe for me. Slow." He breathed. She watched the movement equalize, not fully, not perfectly, but enough. The tension pneumothorax she'd been most worried about had been caught by the flight medic's earlier decompression. What she was managing now was the aftermath, the stabilization work that was less dramatic and more important. She moved to his IV line, checked the rate, adjusted. "What's your pain level?" she asked. "Like a 6. "That's either very brave or very bad," she said. "Which is it?" A pause. "Maybe a 7. "Okay." She pulled a pre-filled syringe. "This is going to help. Don't thank me yet because it's going to make you feel strange for a minute." "Strange how?" "Like the helicopter is moving sideways." "It is moving sideways." "Then you'll have a head start," she said, and administered it. She moved before he finished processing the response. That was the rhythm of this work. She'd learned it the hard way over years of operating in environments where the next patient was always ready before you finished with the current one, and the hardest discipline was moving your hands forward while your attention was still reaching back. You couldn't stay. You had to trust what you'd done and move. The third position casualty was worse. Sergeant First Class Mira Okonkwo was 31 years old, and Olivia knew before she got close that the expectant classification the Marine outside had mentioned was not pessimism. It was an assessment made by someone who'd run out of options in a moving aircraft with limited supplies. Okonkwo had a penetrating abdominal injury from fragmentation, field-packed, and the packing had held but not cleanly. Her pressure was low and dropping in the slow way that's more dangerous than the fast way, because it's easier to rationalize. Olivia knelt beside her, checked pupils, checked radial pulse, checked the packing. Okonkwo was conscious, which was its own kind of complicated. She looked up at Olivia with dark, clear eyes and said, "How bad?" Olivia didn't insult her by softening it. "Bad enough that I need to work fast and I need you to stay very still." "Okay." "Are you in pain?" "Not as much as I should be," Okonkwo said, which was a medically significant sentence dressed up as an observation, and they both understood that. "I know," Olivia said. "I'm going to repack and we're going to support your pressure until we hit the ship. Can you do that?" "I've done harder things." Olivia almost said, "I know you have." She'd read the rank insignia, read the unit patch, understood what it meant to be a 31-year-old sergeant first class in this particular element. But she was already working and saying things used time she didn't have. The repacking was not clean. It was not the kind of thing that looked like anything good was happening when you were watching it, and the flight medic, a young specialist named Torres, who'd been hovering at Olivia's left shoulder since she'd come aboard, observing with the specific intensity of someone learning in real time, made a sound that he immediately tried to suppress. "Don't look away," Olivia said to him, not unkindly. "You need to see this." "Yes, ma'am. When you do this alone, and you will do this alone at some point, the most important thing is keeping your hands deliberate, not fast. Deliberate. Speed comes from deliberate." She could feel the helicopter banking. They were maybe 25 minutes out from the naval medical ship if the pilot held speed. She needed Okonkwo stable enough to survive a handoff, which was different from stable, which was different from safe. 3 different thresholds, each requiring different things from her. She worked. Back at Suncrest Valley Medical Center, Raymond Holt was standing in the courtyard trying to make sense of what had just happened to his Tuesday evening. The helicopters, 3 of them still on the ground, 1 departed, had turned the hospital's exterior into something that looked like a staging area. Marines moved with efficient purposefulness that bore no resemblance to the way civilians moved in a hospital, which was either hurriedly or slowly, with nothing in between. They'd taken over the ER bay not aggressively but thoroughly, in the way that competent people take over spaces, by simply knowing what to do and doing it, and leaving no conversational gap for anyone to question the arrangement. A gunnery sergeant named Falco had found Holt in the courtyard and briefed him in approximately 90 seconds, which had been long enough to establish who had authority here and short enough to communicate that extended conversation was not currently on the agenda. "You're going to receive casualties from the primary aircraft when it returns," Falco said. "We need your trauma bays clear, your blood bank on standby, and your surgical team in-house within the hour. The patients will be stabilized, not surgical ready. Your team will need to take them the rest of the way." Holt had practiced medicine for 22 years and administered this department for 9. He was not accustomed to being briefed. "I need to know what this is about before I—" "Dr. Holt." Falco's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Those are your patients in about 35 minutes. How you prepare for them is your call. I'm telling you what they're going to need." Holt opened his mouth, closed it. "Who authorized this facility as the receiving site?" he asked. Falco's expression shifted by a fraction. Not softening exactly, more like a slight adjustment for someone who's dealing with a question that's technically valid but practically irrelevant. "That authorization came from levels above what I'm briefed to discuss. What I can tell you is that your facility was specifically selected, and that the selection was based in part on personnel currently or recently associated with this hospital." "Personnel." Holt stopped. "Marsh? You're telling me this was routed here because of Olivia Marsh?" Falco looked at him with an expression that Holt would remember later and not enjoy thinking about. Raven 1 was the operative consideration, yes. Holt stood there for a moment in the courtyard with the desert wind blowing and the rotor wash from the remaining helicopters pushing back the hot evening air, and something occurred to him. Not a thought exactly, more like the absence of a thought. The sudden vertiginous realization that a framework he'd been operating in was missing structural elements he'd never known to look for. He walked back inside to prepare his department. Delia Ruiz was already 3 steps ahead of him. She'd been 3 steps ahead of him since the moment the communications went dark, at which point she'd gathered the available staff, assigned roles, and begun converting the procedure room with the efficiency of someone who runs this scenario in her head on bad nights as a coping mechanism. She'd gotten the blood bank on the phone. The hospital's internal network was still functional, and the bank administrator had confirmed that the O-neg shipment had been expedited at the request of a nursing staff member that afternoon and had arrived 2 hours early, sitting in cold storage and available. She'd been confused about the early arrival when she'd called to check. She wasn't confused now. She had the bays clear and the surgical team paged by the time Holt came through the doors, and she was standing at the supply cart running a checklist when he found her. "You knew," he said. Delia kept running her checklist. "I knew to prepare. I didn't know for what." "Marsh called you. She asked me to take a precaution. She didn't tell me why. She made a notation on the clipboard." "Good thing I listened." Holt was quiet for a moment. Around them, nurses and techs were moving with the focused brevity of people who've been given real information and are now doing something useful with it. The department smelled like antiseptic and anxiety, which was its baseline during normal operations, and something else tonight. The particular electricity of a situation that everyone understands is outside the normal parameters. "She's been here 3 years, Holt said. It wasn't clear who he was saying it to. Delia lowered the clipboard. She looked at him, and what he saw in her expression was not anger. It was something more precise than anger, something that had been waiting for the right structural conditions to become visible. She corrected 11 medication errors in those 3 years. She identified 3 patients with acute presentations that had been initially missed. She ran her department on 60% of the budget because she managed supply inventory better than anyone we've ever had. And she did all of it while people like you looked through her. Delia, I'm not finished. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. You handed her a termination letter this morning and smiled. And tonight she's in a helicopter saving the people who were apparently here to protect her. She picked up the clipboard again. So no, Dr. Holt. She has not been here 3 years. She is considerably more than that, and I think you know it now. Holt said nothing. He went to prepare for the incoming casualties, which was the only useful thing available to him. In the helicopter, Olivia had gotten Okonkwo's pressure up, not to where it needed to be, not to safe, but to survivable, which was the threshold she was targeting. She'd run through the last of her secondary supply kit and was working now with the aircraft's remaining stores, making decisions about what to use and what to hold in reserve the way you play a hand of cards, when you know you won't get more cards and you're not sure how many more rounds are coming. Torres had stopped making sounds. He was watching her with the complete, quiet attention of someone whose education is happening faster than they expected. She could feel his presence at her shoulder, not interfering, just absorbing. And she understood it, had been on that side of it herself once, and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say that wasn't already being communicated by watching her hands. "How are you doing?" she asked him between checks. "Good, ma'am." "Don't say good. Tell me where you are." A pause. "I'm tracking everything. There's a lot of it. There's always a lot of it. The goal isn't to see everything. The goal is to see what's going to kill someone in the next 5 minutes and make that not happen. Everything else is secondary." "How do you know which thing that is?" "Practice," she said. "And before you have enough practice, pattern recognition. And before you have enough pattern recognition, you ask someone who does." She checked Reyes's line again, without looking up from Okonkwo. "Ask questions. Don't perform competence you don't have. The ones who get people killed out here aren't the ones who admit they don't know. They're the ones who pretend they do." Torres was quiet for a moment. "How long did it take you to—" "Long time," she said. "Longer than it should have, probably." That was true. She didn't expand on it. Ma'am. The naval medical ship appeared through the helicopter's forward windows as a constellation of light on the dark water, organized and purposeful in the way that military installations were organized and purposeful. No wasted illumination, everything serving a function. The pilot came over the intercom to give her the 3-minute call, and she spent those 3 minutes doing the last thing she could do and accepting that everything else would need to be someone else's problem once the ramp dropped. Reyes had his eyes open and was talking about his mother again, which she'd decided was a good sign. Okonkwo had her eyes closed and was breathing in a rhythm that Olivia was monitoring with one hand on her wrist, counting without looking at her watch, doing the math in her head the way she'd done it in rooms and vehicles and outdoor locations that were nothing like a hospital for the better part of a decade. The third critical casualty, a staff sergeant named Briggs, who'd had a significant head injury and had been her quietest concern for the entire flight because quiet brain injuries were the kind that surprised you, had maintained GCS throughout and had even, at one point, told Torres to stop hovering because it was making him nervous. Torres had looked at Olivia. She'd said, "Let him talk," and Torres had backed off, and Briggs had spent 10 minutes telling a largely incoherent story about a poker game that had no obvious conclusion, which was reassuring in the specific way that confused consciousness was reassuring compared to absent consciousness. The ship's deck rose to meet them. The skids touched. The ramp dropped. The ship's medical team came aboard at a pace that told her immediately they were good. Not asking her what had happened, not trying to reestablish the situation from scratch, but reading the patient configurations she'd left them and starting handoffs before she'd said a word. A Navy lieutenant who was clearly the senior medical officer on the receiving end looked at the state of her supplies, looked at her patients, looked at her. "You did this on the transit?" he said. "Yes." "With what you had?" "And what they had." He shook his head, not in disbelief, in a kind of compressed professional appreciation that didn't have time to expand into conversation. Briggs needs CT immediately. Okonkwo goes to surgical. Reyes, I want a trauma attending on him now, but I think he's going to be okay. Reyes is going to be okay, Olivia agreed. He told me so. The lieutenant almost smiled. Are you coming aboard? She looked at the ramp, at the dark water and the lights of the ship and the organized chaos of people receiving casualties she'd kept alive for 43 minutes in a metal box in the sky. I need to get back, she said. Back where? Mesa Flats. Suncrest Valley Medical Center. She paused. There are more coming. He looked at her. How many more? She'd been given partial information, enough to operate on, not enough to plan around. That was standard. It was also the thing she disliked most about operating on partial information, which was that it required trust in a system she could only see part of at any given time. I don't know exactly, but my hospital is the designated receiving site, and I need to be there. The lieutenant made a decision in the same brief window that all decisions in this environment were made. We can have you back in the air in 6 minutes. That works, she said. Was. She sat in the returned helicopter, a different configuration, fewer passengers, the quiet that follows intensity, and did the thing she almost never allowed herself to do in operational contexts, which was feel something. Not feel everything. Not open it all the way. Just acknowledge the fact of what had happened in the last hour and let her nervous system register it before she asked it to do more. Her hands were steady. Her thinking was clear. But underneath both of those things was a tremor that wasn't physical, a frequency she recognized as the thing that came after, the cost of having been completely present in a situation that demanded it, paid forward into the body like a deferred invoice. She pressed her palms against her thighs and breathed. She thought about Okonkwo's eyes, clear and dark, and completely unafraid in a situation that justified fear. She thought about Reyes's grip on her wrist, the specificity of that grip, not desperate but grounding, the kind of touch that said, "Tell me this is manageable," without saying anything. She thought about Briggs's poker story and the way Torres had watched her hands like the answer to something was in them. She allowed herself 30 seconds. 30 seconds was what she had. She used all of them. Then she took out the secondary phone and checked for updates. There were 2. The first was a status update she'd expected. The operation she'd been called into was still active. Additional elements en route. Suncrest Valley Medical Center confirmed as primary stabilization site for the next 6 to 9 hours. This was consistent with what she'd told the ship's lieutenant. It meant she was going back to the right place. The second message she hadn't expected. It was short. 4 lines of operational text that she read twice with the same expression she'd used on the termination letter that morning. Not because she didn't understand it, but because understanding it required a moment of recalibration that her mind needed to perform before she could move forward with the information. The message said, in the language her unit had used for exactly this kind of disclosure, that the routing of this operation through Mesa Flats and through Suncrest Valley Medical Center specifically was not coincidental. That the hospital had been on a protected site list for 26 months, cross-referenced with her location and updated whenever she updated. That the protection of the site had been, at various points during those 26 months, active, meaning personnel had been assigned to it, meaning that the hospital she'd worked in for 3 years, where people had handed her termination letters and called her a liability and left her managing supply closets, had been under covert protection the whole time, protection that had been extended to cover her. She sat with that for a moment. Outside, the desert was dark below them, and the lights of Mesa Flats were appearing on the horizon. She understood now why the message had said they'd been tracking her location. She understood, in a way she hadn't before, that her choices about where to go and what to do had been visible to people who had their own operational reasons for those choices to be made in specific ways. She wasn't sure yet how she felt about that. She filed it in the part of her mind that handled things that required more data before conclusions could be drawn, because right now she needed to be functional and feeling betrayed, if that's what this was, which she hadn't determined yet, was not functional. What she felt instead, in the space where a more emotionally organized person might have felt something clean, was the specific, complicated awareness of being someone other people make decisions around without telling them. She'd been that for a long time. She was still that. The difference was that now she knew it. The helicopter began its descent toward Mesa Flats. The scene in the Suncrest Valley courtyard when she landed was different from the one she'd left, organized, where it had been chaotic, purposeful, where it had been confused. The Marines had established a perimeter that looked casual and wasn't. She recognized the positioning, the angles, the specific way three people standing at apparently conversational distances from each other could cover an entire approach corridor. Gunnery Sergeant Falco was at the ER entrance speaking into a headset with the compact efficiency of someone managing multiple information streams simultaneously. He saw her come off the helicopter and met her halfway across the courtyard. "Okonkwo?" he asked. "In surgical on the ship. She's going to be a fight, but she's in the fight." Falco nodded once. "Reyes? Going to be okay. He's a talker. He's always been a talker." The ghost of something crossed Falco's face that wasn't quite a smile. Recognition, maybe, or affection of the particular reserved kind that people develop for the people they operate alongside. "Briggs? CT in progress. His neurological status held through the flight. I can't tell you more than that." Falco processed this. "Second wave is 40 minutes out, 7 casualties, 3 critical, 4 walking wounded. Your surgical team going to be ready?" "That's not my call to make on the clinical side," she said. "But the department is prepped. The blood bank is stocked." She paused. "How did the blood bank get stocked?" Falco looked at her. "Shipment was expedited." "I know. I asked Delia to make that call this afternoon. But someone expedited a shipment of oneg before I asked her to." A brief silence. Falco's expression didn't change exactly, but there was a shift in it. The shift of someone who is deciding how much information the operational situation requires him to share. "Logistics precaution," he said. 48-hour advance planning. Standard for the route." She held his look for a moment. "How long has this hospital been on your protected site list?" Falco said nothing. "Falco." "Raven 1. He said her call sign with the particular cadence of someone invoking a protocol, not just a name. "We've got 40 minutes. Let's use them." She let it go. Not because she was satisfied, but because he was right that they had 40 minutes and they both knew how to prioritize. She walked into the hospital. The emergency department had been transformed. This was not an exaggeration, and it was not smooth. The transformation was visible in the imperfect evidence of rapid adaptation, the cable runs that had been taped to floors without quite enough tape, the supply carts repositioned in configurations that served trauma intake logic rather than standard department flow. The whiteboard at the nurses' station wiped clean and rewritten in Delia's handwriting with a grid she'd constructed from memory and operational logic. Delia was at the central station with a tablet and 2 nurses, running through checklist items with the flat efficiency of someone who has stopped thinking about whether they can do this and is simply doing it. She looked up when Olivia came through the ER doors. Something in her expression shifted. Not relief. Not quite. Because Delia was not a person who let herself feel relief until the situation allowed it, but something adjacent to it. The specific release of tension that comes when a person you've been worried about reappears in your field of vision intact. "You're back," Delia said. "Second wave incoming, 40 minutes, 7 patients." Olivia was already moving toward the supply cart. 3 critical. Tell your surgical team we'll need continuous relay, not parallel. Bring in the next before the previous is fully closed if you have to. I know it's not protocol. It's what we're going to need." She checked the cart inventory. "Who's your most experienced OR tech tonight?" "Haskell. She's been here 18 years and she doesn't rattle." "Good. Put her with the attending on critical number 1 and keep her there. Haskell calls the pace, not the attending." Delia stared at her. "I can't tell Dr. Reinhold that his OR tech is running. You're not telling Reinhold anything. You're structuring the room so that the person with the best trauma integration experience is the anchor." Olivia looked at her directly. "If Reinhold pushes back, tell him it was the field medic's recommendation. He won't know who to argue with." A beat. Then Delia almost laughed. Not fully, not with everything they had happening around them, but enough. "You haven't changed." "I've changed a lot," Olivia said. "The job hasn't." She was moving to the next station when she heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Holt. He looked different from this morning. The change was not dramatic. He was still wearing the same clothes, still had the same silver-streaked hair, and the particular posture of someone who has been the most important person in the room for a long time. But something in his expression had come slightly unstuck, like a cabinet door that's been forced closed for years and is no longer quite flush. "The second wave," he said. "Falco briefed me. 7 patients." "Yes. We're set for 4 trauma bays. Delia says we can convert to a 5th in—" "You'll need the 5th," Olivia said. "Convert it now." He nodded, started to turn, stopped. "Marsh." He said her name like he was testing its weight. "I owe you an apology." She looked at him. She'd had this conversation before, in different forms, in contexts ranging from professional to personal. The retroactive apology, the acknowledgement that arrives after the evidence has made denial impossible. She'd learned the hard way that there was a version of accepting an apology that was graceful and good for the relationship and ultimately served no one, because it allowed the person apologizing to feel resolved without doing anything differently. "You can apologize after the second wave," she said. "Right now I need you to tell your surgical team to eat something in the next 20 minutes, because once those helicopters land, there won't be time." Holt blinked. Then, with the particular adaptability of someone who has decided the situation requires following rather than leading, he turned and went to do exactly that. The second wave came in at 43 minutes, not 40. The pilot had pushed speed, which she filed without comment, because speed was a judgment call that hadn't been hers to make. 7 patients, as briefed. 3 critical, 4 walking wounded, which was a medical category that covered considerable territory. One of the 4 walking wounded had a femoral contusion that needed serious imaging, another had blast-related hearing damage, and a dislocated shoulder. The 3rd and 4th were what they appeared to be: alert, mobile, in pain, functional. The 3 critical cases were worse than what she'd worked on in the helicopter. She didn't allow herself the word worse in the operational sense. She had resources now, a facility, a team. She was no longer working in a moving aircraft with a depleted kit. But in pure injury severity, these 3 exceeded what she'd managed in transit. A thoracic injury that was going to need surgical intervention within the next 40 minutes. An abdominal gunshot wound, different in character from Okonkwo's fragmentation injury, that had been field stabilized and was holding but wouldn't hold indefinitely. And a casualty who had no immediately visible injury but presented with the specific, worrying constellation of symptoms that pointed toward blast concussive syndrome, severe enough to have caused secondary cardiac involvement. She directed the first 2 to the trauma bays and took the 3rd herself, because the 3rd was the one that would get lost. The one without an obvious wound for a physician's eye to fix. The one that required diagnostic instinct rather than surgical intervention. And the one most likely to be triaged as lower priority by a team that was suddenly managing 6 other urgent cases. She set up in Bay 5, the converted procedure room, with Torres beside her, because Torres had been in her orbit for the last 90 minutes and had done nothing wrong and was now genuinely useful in a limited but real way. "Pull the cardiac monitor," she told him. "I need a rhythm." He pulled it. She watched the screen. The rhythm was wrong in the specific way she'd suspected. Not catastrophically wrong. Not VFib. Not the kind of wrong that required a crash cart in the next 30 seconds, but a rhythmic and a pattern consistent with myocardial contusion from blast pressure. Treatable. Manageable. Not something that would have been caught in the chaos of the main trauma bay intake. "Go get Dr. Holt," she said. Torres went. She kept her eyes on the monitor. The casualty, a corporal named Agosto, who was conscious and confused and kept asking where his team was, looked at the screen beside him and said, "Is that mine?" "Yes." "Is it bad?" "It's something we're going to take care of right now," she said. "Your team is here. They came in with you." Agosto seemed to process this. "Briggs?" "Briggs is on the ship," she said. "He was telling a story about a poker game last I saw him." Agosto's expression shifted in a way that was hard to read. Relief and something else. Something older. "He always does that. He doesn't even play poker. He just talks about it." "I know," she said, though she didn't know. But she understood the function of the detail. It was a contact point, a proof of continuity, and Agosto needed that more than he needed accuracy right now. Holt arrived. She briefed him in 45 seconds. Rhythm, suspected mechanism, what she needed from him, and watched him shift from administrator to physician in a way that reminded her, uncomfortably, that he was not a bad doctor. He was a poor administrator and a worse person in certain structural ways, but his clinical instincts were sound once something real was in front of him. He took over Agosto's monitoring with the focus she needed him to have. She stepped back. She went where she was needed next. The next 2 hours were the kind of work she'd spent 3 years trying to forget she was capable of. Not because it was extraordinary, it was, in the technical sense, but extraordinary work in the field felt like other things when you were inside it. Calculation, improvisation, the specific democracy of triage, which was that the system had to be maintained or the whole system failed. It wasn't heroism. It was logistics with stakes. She made mistakes. Small ones. The kind that didn't cost anyone anything because she caught them before they propagated. But she made them, and she knew she made them, and she cataloged them in the back of her mind for later. Her left leg was aching badly by midnight. The leg always reminded her of its history when she pushed it this hard. And she was running on whatever her body stored past the point of legitimate reserves, which she knew from experience was real but not infinite. She drank water when someone handed it to her. She didn't stop moving. At 12:47 a.m., Gunnery Sergeant Falco came to the threshold of the trauma bay she was in and said, "That's the last of them." She looked up. "All accounted for?" "All accounted for. Ship confirmed receipt of all critical cases. Walking wounded are either treated and holding or en route to the base medical facility." He paused. "Your hospital did good work tonight." "My hospital," she said. And then, because the alternative was explaining something she didn't have words for at 12:47 a.m., after what had been the longest day she'd had in 26 months. "Yes, they did." Falco nodded. "There's something else." She waited. Colonel Marsh. The rank felt strange in this building, in these clothes, with a stethoscope around her neck and someone else's blood on her sleeves. The operation that routed through Mesa Flats tonight was not random. You were told it was proximity and skill set, and that's true. But there's a third component that you're owed the information on, and I'm authorized to tell you now that the operational window is closed. She waited. "The individuals who recommended your termination to hospital administration this morning," Falco stopped, chose the next words with care. "That recommendation did not originate from within the hospital." She looked at him. "There's an ongoing federal investigation, has been for 4 months. It involves Suncrest Valley's administrative structure, certain financial arrangements, and external pressure applied to personnel decisions over the past 2 years. He held her gaze. "You were on a list, Raven One. Someone was motivated to get you out of this building before tonight." The lobby was quiet around them. Somewhere down the hall she could hear Delia giving instructions, the low professional murmur of a department settling after crisis. The lights were still on. The backup generators were still running. Everything was functional and imperfect and continuing forward. She thought about the termination letter folded twice in her pocket. She thought about Holt's smile when he handed it to her. She thought about the photograph in her box, face down in the back of her truck, of 6 people in desert camo squinting into a sun that was somewhere that didn't make it onto civilian maps. "Who's running the investigation?" she asked. Falco's answer was 3 words. 3 words that changed the shape of everything she'd understood about this day and about the 3 years before it, and about why the helicopters had come to Mesa Flats, and why she'd been called Raven One in the courtyard of a hospital where people couldn't look her in the eye. She was still processing what he'd said when the lobby doors opened and 3 people came through in civilian clothes that were not civilian clothes, the specific cut and bearing that her pattern recognition system flagged before her conscious mind caught up. And the one in front held up credentials that Olivia recognized at a level below thought, in the part of her that had been trained to recognize exactly those credentials, in exactly that format, in situations that required exactly this, federal. She looked at the credentials, looked at the person holding them, looked at Falco. Falco's expression was not surprise. Holt walked out of Bay 3 and stopped dead in the corridor, 6 feet from the federal agents, and the color left his face in the specific, complete way that only happened to people who had been expecting this moment while simultaneously hoping it would never arrive. The one in front was a woman. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back with the efficiency of someone who doesn't think about it anymore. A jacket that had the right kind of wear at the elbows. She held the credentials for exactly as long as was required and then folded them away with the same motion. Practiced, unremarkable. The gesture of someone who produces credentials many times a week and has stopped caring what effect it has. Special Agent Dana Wexler, she said. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes, and Public Corruption Division. I'm looking for Dr. Raymond Holt. Holt was standing 6 feet away and had not moved. He'd had 26 months to prepare for this, and it hadn't helped. I'm Holt, he said. His voice was steady. She would give him that. His voice was steady, which was more than most people managed when the thing they'd been dreading walked through their front door in civilian clothes and federal credentials at 10 minutes to 1 in the morning. Wexler looked at him. We'd like to speak with you privately. Is there a space available? My office is... He stopped. Something was moving behind his eyes, some rapid internal calculation that she recognized as the moment a person decides whether to comply or to perform compliance while actually doing something else. She'd seen that calculation before. It was useful information. Yes, of course. This way. He didn't look at Olivia. She noticed. Wexler's second agent, male, younger, carrying a tablet case that wasn't just a tablet case, fell into step behind Holt. The third agent held position near the lobby entrance in a way that blocked nothing visibly and everything practically. Wexler paused at the threshold and turned back to Olivia. Colonel Marsh, she said, and the rank landed in the lobby the way a heavy object lands on a hard floor. Not an explosion, but an impact, something that everyone nearby felt in their feet. We'll need your statement as well, tonight, if possible. I'm available, Olivia said. Wexler looked at her for a moment, one of those assessments that good agents disguised as ordinary eye contact. Falco briefed us on the operation. What you did tonight... She stopped. I'll see you in about an hour. She walked toward Holt's office. Mom. Delia appeared at Olivia's elbow so quickly and so quietly that it was almost funny. Did she just call you Colonel? Delia asked. Yes. You're a colonel. I was a colonel. I took a medical separation. You have a rank that is significantly above every physician in this building. Rank doesn't work like that across branches, and I'm not military anymore. I'm a supply nurse. She paused. I was a supply nurse. As of 9 this morning, I'm apparently unemployed. Delia stared at her. Then she made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and landed somewhere in the territory of a person whose understanding of the last 3 years is being reconstructed in real time while she's standing in a hospital corridor at 1 in the morning with someone else's blood on her scrubs. Olivia. I know. Why didn't you? Because I needed to be here, Olivia said. Not as what I was, as what I could do here. She looked at Delia directly. I wasn't hiding from you. I was just resting in a different shape. Delia was quiet for a moment. That's the strangest thing anyone's ever said to me. It's 1 in the morning. I've been awake for 21 hours. My standards are lower. Are you okay? The question was simple, and she'd been asked it several times tonight in different registers. Torres asking it professionally, Falco asking it operationally, the lieutenant on the ship asking it as a logistical check. Delia was asking it as the only person in this building who'd spent 3 years watching her and had never been told what she was watching. I will be, Olivia said. Right now I need to check on Agosto. Agosto's rhythm had stabilized. Holt had been thorough. She would continue to give him that. His clinical work tonight had been thorough, and the arrhythmia had responded to the pharmacological intervention, and the monitoring had been continuous. Torres was at the bedside when she came in, which she noticed without commenting on. The kid had attached himself to the orbit of each critical patient as the evening progressed, not hovering, just present. Learning. Agosto was awake. More awake than earlier, the confusion had cleared to something approaching lucidity, which was a meaningful improvement. Your team's okay, she said before he could ask. All of them. Some are still in process, but all of them are in the right places. He exhaled. It was the exhale of someone who has been holding something large and hasn't had a safe moment to put it down. Who are you? Olivia Marsh. I'm a nurse. You're not just a nurse. Tonight, I'm a nurse, she said. That's enough. He looked at her with the particular gaze of someone who has been in enough situations to read another person's resume in the way they stand. You were Field, weren't you? Long time ago. Doesn't look like long time ago from where I'm lying. She checked his rhythm on the monitor. Still holding, still improving, the pattern normalizing in the direction she'd expected. You need to sleep. Let the medication work. Don't argue with the monitor. The monitor doesn't argue back. Neither do I, she said, which was not entirely true, but was true enough for one in the morning. The hospital had gone quiet in the specific way that hospitals went quiet after mass events. Not peaceful, but hollowed, the kind of quiet that comes when a building has run at maximum capacity for hours and is now running at minimum because there's nothing left to do except maintain. The Marines were still present, but configured differently. Less in the corridors and more at perimeter positions she couldn't see directly but could infer. Falco had moved outside. The 3 federal agents were in Holt's office. She found a chair in the break room and sat in it for 15 minutes. Her leg was the worst it had been in a year. She'd been compensating for hours without thinking about it, letting the work absorb the pain the way it always did. And now that the work had paused, the pain had arrived with the particular spite of something that's been waiting for the right moment to announce itself. She pressed her palm against her thigh and breathed through it, and did not give it more acknowledgement than that. She thought about the message Falco had given her. The federal investigation, 4 months, the financial arrangements and external pressure, and the list with her name on it. Someone had wanted her out of the building before tonight, which meant someone had known tonight was coming, which meant the threat to the operation, to the extraction route, to the personnel involved, had an origin point that wasn't external to Mesa Flats. She sat with that for 3 full minutes, following the logic through its branches without rushing it, without stopping it. This was something she'd always been able to do that other people struggled with. Hold a complicated, threatening thought to completion without the mind's defensive machinery kicking in to redirect her towards something easier. When she'd followed it all the way through, she got up and went to find Falco. He was in the courtyard, standing at the edge of the helicopter perimeter in the position of someone not actively doing anything, which in his case meant the opposite. She stood beside him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The termination letter was dated 3 days ago, she said. Yes. Someone applied external pressure to this hospital's administrative structure to get me removed from this building before the operation passed through. Falco said nothing, which was an answer. And the operations route was established when? How far in advance? That's outside my... Falco. She didn't raise her voice. I'm not asking for classified operational logistics. I'm asking whether there's a breach, whether someone with knowledge of this route also had the means and motivation to compromise it through civilian channels. A pause. The desert night was genuinely quiet now. No helicopter noise, no motor noise, just the specific silence of a place that was far from other places and knew it. Overhead, the stars were the kind of profligate and indifferent that only happened at distance from city light. The investigation has a person of interest, Falco said finally. Has had one for approximately 6 weeks. The timeline of that interest's actions and the timeline of pressure applied to certain personnel decisions at this hospital are... He chose the word carefully. Parallel. Who is it? That's for Wexler. I know it's for Wexler. I'm asking you. Falco looked at her with the expression of a career military man making a judgment call about where the line was on this particular evening. His name is Gareth Solis, he said. He's the hospital's CFO. He's been in that position for 2 years, which is 8 months longer than the period we've been watching certain financial channels. Gareth Solis. She knew the name. She knew the face. Administrative floor, she'd seen him in the corridors during budget cycles, the particular type of hospital executive who wore expensive shoes and moved through the building like the building was performing for him. She'd never had a direct interaction with him. She'd had no reason to. He's still in the building, she said. It wasn't a question. He's on the 4th floor. His office is next to the CFO suite. Falco paused. He doesn't know Wexler is here. She came in through the ER entrance specifically to avoid the main lobby camera coverage. She absorbed this. Does he know the operation failed? That I'm back in the building? Unknown. If he does, she said, working through it, then he knows his exit window is closing. If he has anything to move, documents, records, external communications, he's going to try to move it now. Falco's jaw tightened fractionally. That is Wexler's concern. It's everyone's concern, she said, because if he gets those records out of this building before Wexler finishes with Holt, the investigation loses its primary physical evidence trail. She turned toward the entrance. Which floor did you say? Marsh. She stopped. Wexler has people on him, Falco said. She's not running a loose operation. He's being watched. Then what I'm about to do won't interfere with anything. She went inside. The fourth floor of Suncrest Valley Medical Center at 1:30 in the morning was deserted in all the ways that administrative floors were deserted at night. Not locked, not alarmed in any way that would be triggered by a credentialed staff member moving through corridors, but empty, fluorescent lit, the particular corporate stillness of office space at rest. She still had a visitor sticker from the front desk. She'd forgotten to take it off. She took the stairs because elevators were observable and stairs were not. She came out in the fourth floor corridor and moved without haste toward the CFO suite, which she located by the suite numbering system she'd memorized in her first week at the hospital, not because she'd expected to need it, but because knowing building layouts was not optional, it was structural. The lights in the CFO suite's outer office were off. The lights in the office beyond Hotet Solis's private office were on. She stopped 12 feet from the door and stood still and listened. Movement. The specific movement of someone doing something fast and not quite controlled. The sound of a person who is scared and working. Drawer slides. The particular click of a laptop closing. A zipper on a bag. She stood in the corridor and made a decision, which was not the same as making a plan. A plan required more information than she had. A decision required only a threshold. She'd decided that whatever was in that office was not going to leave it tonight through means that weren't Wexler's, and she was going to use whatever was available to her to ensure that. What was available to her was the following: her presence, which was unexpected, her training, which was specific and extensive in ways that administrative corridors did not typically test, and the specific authority of someone who had nothing left to lose in this building, which was a kind of freedom that she hadn't felt in 3 years, and recognized now with something close to clarity. She knocked on the open door. Gareth Solis was behind his desk with a leather bag open and a laptop halfway inside it, and a USB drive in his left hand. He was 51 years old, moderately fit, and wearing the expression of a man who has been caught in the most precise sense of that phrase. "Ms. Marsh," he said, and then stopped. The use of her name, the fact that he used her name, confirmed what Falco's information had already implied. "Mr. Solis," she said. She stayed in the doorway. She did not approach the desk. He recovered faster than she expected. "What are you doing up here? You don't have clearance to be on this visitor badge," she said, indicating the sticker. "I'm in the building as a guest." "At 1:30 in the morning." "It's been a busy night," she said. "I thought I'd see if you'd heard." He was still holding the USB drive. He hadn't put it down and he hadn't continued packing. He was in a state of operational suspension, waiting for more information before committing to an action, which she understood because it was what she'd do. "Heard what?" "About the operation, the Marines, the casualties we received." She looked at him with the flat, patient attention that she'd learned was more unsettling than aggression, because aggression gave a person something to respond to. "Busy night for the hospital. I thought you might be interested, given your role in managing the hospital." His eyes moved to the bag. She watched the movement and let him watch her watch it. "I was just leaving," he said. "It's 1:30 in the morning. I had work to finish. I'm done now." He moved to close the laptop. "Don't," she said. He stopped. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had the specific quality of words spoken by people who have spent time in environments where the words you say and the way you say them are the difference between a situation staying manageable and a situation becoming something else. He looked at her from behind the desk, and she looked at him from the doorway, and they both understood in this moment that the thing happening between them was not a conversation about work hours. "I don't know what you think," he started. "I think you knew about the extraction route through Mesa Flats," she said. "I think you knew approximately when it was happening. I think you spent the last 3 days ensuring I wouldn't be in this building when it happened, which tells me you understood that my being here was a risk to whatever arrangement you've made with whoever needed the operation compromised." She paused. "I think the termination letter Holt handed me this morning came from instructions that originated with you." The color in his face shifted. Not dramatically. He had the particular controlled pallor of a man who has been managing fear for long enough to do it efficiently, but enough. "You need to leave my office," he said. "Possibly," she said. "But before I do, I want you to know something." She leaned against the door frame, and the position was deliberate, not threatening, not blocking, just present. "Special Agent Wexler is on the 3rd floor with Dr. Holt right now. She's been building this case for 4 months. Whatever is on that drive," she nodded toward his left hand where the USB drive was still held, "is going to be interesting to her." Solis looked at the drive, then at her, then at the window, which was on the interior wall of the building and overlooked nothing useful. "I want a lawyer," he said. "That's your right," she said. "You should have called one about 10 minutes ago." She reached into her scrub pocket and produced her personal phone. She called Falco. When he answered, she said, "4th floor CFO suite. Bring Wexler when she's available." She didn't say anything else. She ended the call. She put the phone back in her pocket. Solis sat down. He didn't try to move the drive. He didn't close the laptop. He sat in his chair with the leather bag half packed in front of him and looked at the desk surface and breathed in the specific way of someone who is deciding how to manage what comes next. She stood in the doorway. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired, and her leg hurt, and she felt the specific quality of clarity that came at the end of a long thing. Not resolution, not yet, but the first structural evidence that resolution was possible, that the shape of this particular situation was becoming visible. Wexler arrived in 8 minutes. She came up the stairs alone, which Olivia suspected was not how she'd planned to arrive, but was an efficient adaptation to the information she'd received. She stopped at the office door, took in Solis, the bag, the drive, the laptop. She took in Olivia. Her expression said several things, none of which she articulated. "Mr. Solis," she said, "I'm Special Agent Wexler. I've been trying to get in touch with you for several weeks. I'm glad we're finally in the same room." Solis said, "I want a lawyer." "Of course." She looked at Olivia. "Outside." They stood in the corridor while the second agent she'd called came up and positioned himself in the office doorway. Wexler pulled out her phone, made 2 calls, dispatched both quickly, and then turned to Olivia with the expression of someone who is choosing between several possible approaches to a conversation. "He was moving evidence," Olivia said. "I saw. The drive needs forensic handling. I know how to do my job, Colonel Marsh. Not sharp, flat. The statement of fact. I know you do. I'm telling you because the drive has been in his hand for approximately 10 minutes, and before that, it was in a drawer." She paused. "You may also want to pull the building's internal server logs from the last 40 minutes. If he was transmitting to an external address before he switched to the drive, the traffic will be there." Wexler looked at her for a long moment. "Falco said you were something." "Falco's polite." "He's not, actually." She pocketed her phone. "I need to ask you about your termination this morning, about the sequence of administrative decisions regarding your position over the last 6 months, and about what you know about Solis's access to operational information he should not have had access to." "I know some of it," Olivia said. "Not all of it. What you know might connect pieces we're missing." She looked at her. Not the way Holt looked at her, not the way the staff looked at her, but the direct assessment of someone who was capable of correctly identifying what they were looking at. "This investigation has been building for 4 months. What happened tonight," she paused, "may have accelerated our timeline in a way we weren't expecting, which is sometimes how it works." "I know how it works," Olivia said. "I know you do." Wexler turned toward the office. "Give me 20 minutes with him, then I need you in a conference room." She went back in. The door didn't fully close. Olivia leaned against the corridor wall and listened to the desert silence coming through the 4th floor windows and waited. 20 minutes. She used the time the way she'd used the 30 seconds on the helicopter, not to think forward, not to calculate, just to be inside the moment and let her body exist in it. The leg throbbed. She was aware of being hungry in a distant way that had been true for hours and hadn't been operationally relevant until now. She was aware that somewhere in the building, Delia was still working, that Torres was probably at someone's bedside, that Agosto was sleeping or trying to. She was aware that 3 years of a particular kind of invisible life had ended tonight in a way that couldn't be unended. She wasn't sure yet what she felt about that. She kept expecting to feel something sharp and specific, relief or grief or vindication, any of the clean emotions that made for coherent internal experience. And what she found instead was something grainier, the texture of a person standing at the end of a thing and not yet able to see the shape of the next thing. She was still thinking about this when Wexler came back out of the office with the USB drive in an evidence bag and the particular controlled energy of someone who has found what she was looking for. "I need to show you something," Wexler said. She held up her tablet. On the screen was a document, administrative format, Suncrest Valley letterhead, with Olivia's name and employee file number at the top. Beneath it, a chain of internal communications spanning 7 weeks. She could see Holt's name. She could see Solis's name. She could see a third name she didn't recognize, an external address, not a hospital domain, appearing at regular intervals throughout. "Do you know who this is?" Wexler asked, indicating the external name. She looked at it. She didn't recognize it directly, but she recognized the domain format, the suffix, the organizational code embedded in it, and her mind took it apart the way it took apart medical presentations and building layouts and encoded messages, automatically, without deciding to. The domain belonged to a federal contractor, specifically a logistics and security consulting firm. Specifically, the kind of firm that sometimes brokered information between people who needed operational intelligence and people who were willing to provide it for money. "No," she said, "but I know what it is." Wexler looked at her. "It's a brokerage," Olivia said. "Whoever's at that address was buying information about this facility and using it to—" She stopped. Something was connecting. Something about the timeline, about the protected site designation, about the 26 months, about the fact that her location had been tracked and updated. "They weren't just trying to move me out," she said slowly. "They were trying to map the protection envelope. If I left the building, they could determine the response threshold, whether anyone came, whether the site was actively monitored or just listed." Wexler's expression confirmed something without saying anything. "The termination was a test," Olivia said. "They wanted to see what happened when I left." "That's our current assessment," Wexler said, "which means they already knew the site was protected. They weren't guessing." She looked at Wexler directly. "There's a breach at a higher level than Solis. He's the mechanism, not the source. Someone told him what to look for and why." Wexler did not confirm this. She also did not deny it. She lowered the tablet. The 4th-floor corridor was very quiet. "Colonel Marsh," Wexler said, "I need to ask you whether you would be willing to assist this investigation in a formal capacity over the coming days. Not as a witness, as someone with specific background that's relevant to the larger picture." Olivia looked at her. "What larger picture?" Wexler opened her mouth to answer. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Something crossed her face that was too fast and too controlled to fully read, but Olivia caught the edge of it. Not alarm, but the variant of urgency that trained people wore when something was moving faster than the plan. She answered, listened, said 2 words. "How long?" She ended the call. She looked at Olivia with the specific expression of someone whose operational situation has just changed in a way that is significant. "We have a problem," she said. "What kind?" Wexler hesitated for exactly 1 second. And in the 14 hours Olivia had been awake, she'd watched a Marine commander, a flight medic, a gunnery sergeant, a naval lieutenant, and a federal agent make decisions under pressure. And she knew what 1 second of hesitation meant in those contexts. And what it meant here was that the information Wexler was about to deliver was not a problem she'd already planned for. "The third name," Wexler said. "The external broker." "Yes. We've been running passive surveillance on that address for 6 weeks. Our technical team just flagged activity in the last 40 minutes. Data transmission, large volume, outbound." Olivia understood before Wexler finished the sentence. Someone tipped them, she said. About tonight. About you being here. Yes. From inside the building. Yes. Wexler was already moving toward the stairs. And whoever it was had access to information about both the operation and the investigation, which means it's not Solus, Olivia said. He's been in that office. No, Wexler said. It's not Solus. She pushed through the stairwell door, and Olivia followed her, and they were moving fast now, down 2 flights, back into the clinical floors, and Olivia's leg was screaming, and she ignored it completely, because there was something sharp in her chest that wasn't pain, but was related to it. The specific tension of a person who has just understood that the thing they thought was finishing has not finished, that a door they thought was closing has opened onto something larger and darker than the room they'd been standing in. They came through the stairwell door on the 2nd floor. The corridor was empty, except at the far end, near the medication dispensing station, where someone was standing with their back to them, phone in hand, and the body language of a person who has just finished doing something they cannot undo. The person turned. Olivia looked at them. She looked for 4 full seconds because her mind refused to accept the identification in less time than that, because she knew this person, had worked beside this person, had trusted this person in the specific, careful, limited way she'd allowed herself to trust anyone in 3 years of a very small life in a very quiet place. And the look on that person's face when they saw Olivia standing at the end of the corridor was not the look of someone caught in an ordinary thing. It was the look of someone caught in a catastrophic thing. And underneath the guilt and the fear, so briefly visible that she almost missed it, was something that looked like relief. The relief of a person who has been carrying something alone for a long time and is finally, against all the calculation they've done about the consequences, done carrying it. The person at the end of the corridor was Delia Ruiz. Olivia stood very still. Behind her she could hear Wexler's breathing, controlled, professional, and the faint sound of the stairwell door settling back into its frame. The corridor was fluorescent lit and empty in every direction except the one that mattered, and Delia was standing 40 feet away with a phone in her hand and an expression that was doing something complicated and terrible. Delia lowered the phone. She didn't run. That was the first thing. She didn't try to push past them or manufacture an explanation or perform confusion the way guilty people sometimes did when they were caught in the specific, complete way she'd been caught. She just stood there with 12 years of emergency nursing in her posture and a look on her face that Olivia had never seen on her before. The look of someone who has been standing on a bridge for a long time and has finally decided to jump, not because they want to fall, but because holding on has become the worst option. Wexler moved past Olivia with the deliberate pace of someone who knows that urgency read as aggression in corridors like this. Miss Ruiz, I'm Special Agent Wexler. I know who you are, Delia said. Her voice was steady. That was the second thing. Her voice was completely steady. I saw you come in. I need you to stay where you are and not use your phone. I'm done with the phone. She held it out, not resisting, not surrendering, just placing it in the space between them as an object she was finished with. I need you to know that I didn't know about the Marines. I didn't know anyone would get hurt. Wexler took the phone without breaking stride. We'll talk about what you knew. I know you will. Delia looked past Wexler, looked at Olivia. And that was the third thing, the hardest thing. Because what was in her face when she looked at Olivia wasn't the performance of a person trying to manage consequences. It was grief. Real, unmanaged grief of the kind that had been stored for a long time and had finally outgrown its container. Olivia, she said. Don't, Olivia said, not angry, just not ready for whatever was about to be said in a corridor at 2 a.m. while her leg was failing and her understanding of the last 3 years was being disassembled in real time. Not right now, Delia nodded. She let Wexler take her arm and she walked. Wexler put Delia in a conference room on the 2nd floor, not an interrogation room, the hospital didn't have those, but a conference room with a door that closed and a second agent positioned outside it. She came back to Olivia in the corridor, and her expression had the particular compressed quality of someone running several operational problems at the same time. How well do you know her? Wexler asked. I thought I knew her well enough. How long? 3 years. We worked the same floor. She's a good nurse. Olivia paused. She is a genuinely good nurse. Whatever she's done, that's not a performance. It never is, Wexler said, which was not a contradiction, just an acknowledgement. What did your technical team pull from her phone? We'll know in 30 minutes, but the transmission from inside the building in the last 40 minutes, Wexler stopped. The timing tracks with her. She was the only staff member with both access to that floor and knowledge of the investigation's presence here tonight. How did she know you were here? She was at the ER entrance when we came in. Wexler looked at her directly. You were also at the ER entrance when we came in. I didn't transmit anything. I know you didn't. A pause. I'm not suggesting you did. I'm explaining how she knew. Olivia looked at the closed conference room door. How long has she been in contact with the broker? That's what I need to find out. Wexler pulled out her own phone. There's something you should know before I go in there. The transmission she made tonight, our technical team is saying the data packet was not intelligence about the investigation. Olivia frowned. What was it? Medical records, specifically records of patient outcomes from tonight's casualties. Names, presenting conditions, treatment administered. Wexler held her gaze. Whoever she sent that to was not asking about the FBI. They were asking about the patients. The corridor was quiet. Olivia took that apart slowly, the way she took apart everything that didn't immediately make sense, not assuming, not concluding, just following the structure of it. Medical records. The specific patients from tonight. Someone needed to know who had survived, who had been treated, and what condition they were in. Someone is tracking the unit's personnel, she said. That's our read. So the broker isn't just brokering intelligence about this facility. They're brokering intelligence about the specific element that came through here tonight. She worked through it. Delia didn't know about the Marines, she said. She might be telling the truth about that. If she was recruited as a source inside the hospital and her tasking was medical information, patient outcomes, personnel routed through civilian facilities, she might never have been told what the information was used for. Wexler's expression shifted fractionally. That's a more charitable interpretation than most people would offer for someone who just transmitted classified patient data. I'm not offering it to be charitable, Olivia said. I'm offering it because if it's accurate, her cooperation level is going to be different from what you'd get if she knew the full operational picture. And you need her cooperation. Wexler considered. I'll keep that in mind. She moved toward the conference room, paused at the door. The agent upstairs with Solace is going to be transporting him to the field office in about 20 minutes. Before that happens, there are some things in his records that I need your read on. Can you be available in an hour? Yes, Olivia said. Wexler went into the conference room. The door closed. She went back to the break room. She sat in the same chair she'd used earlier, and this time she let herself feel the weight of the day fully. Not the operational weight, which she'd been carrying successfully, but the personal weight, the part that didn't have procedures or protocols. Delia. 3 years of small things. Ibuprofen on a bad day, a chart completed when she was running behind, the particular shorthand that developed between people who work close together for long enough that they stop needing to finish sentences. 3 years of what she'd understood to be genuine, which it might still be. Genuine and compromised were not mutually exclusive. She knew that better than most people. She pressed her palms on her thighs and breathed and let the complexity of it exist without trying to resolve it into something simpler. Because simple was not what this was, and pretending otherwise helped no one, least of all herself. Torres appeared in the break room doorway. He looked exhausted in the specific way of someone who's had their first real operational night and has done well and knows it and is now experiencing the aftermath without a frame for what that feels like. He was still in his uniform, which was not clean. None of them were clean. Agosto is asking for you, he said. I'll go in a minute. He didn't leave. He stood in the doorway with the posture of someone who has something else to say and isn't sure of the timing. She recognized the posture. She waited. I've been a flight medic for 14 months, he said. I've done 2 actual field deployments and about 1,000 training hours. Tonight was... He stopped. I didn't think I was going to be able to keep up. You kept up, she said. I almost lost Briggs on the transit. Before you came aboard. I had him, and then I didn't have him, and I wasn't sure what I'd done wrong, and He stopped again. What did you do? she asked. I went back to basics. Airway, breathing, circulation. I stopped trying to remember the advanced stuff I was panicking about, and I just did the basics. That's not a failure, she said. That's exactly right. The advanced stuff works because the basics work. When you're losing someone, you go back to the floor, not the ceiling. She looked at him. What you did tonight, staying present, watching, asking the right questions at the right times, that's most of the job. The rest is practice. Do you ever stop being scared? She considered the question because it deserved consideration. No, you get better at doing the job while scared. That's not the same as the scared going away. He nodded. She could see him filing that, putting it somewhere. He was young enough that everything tonight would be significant to him for a long time, and she was not going to tell him that was wrong because it wasn't. Some things should stay significant. Go get some water and sit down somewhere, she said. The building is secure. Your patients are stable. You've done everything you need to do tonight. He went. She sat for 4 more minutes. Then she got up and went to see Agosto. The sun was still 2 hours from rising when Wexler came to find her in Bay 5. Agosto was asleep. The monitor was steady. She'd been sitting beside him not because he needed monitoring, the nursing staff had that, but because the bay was quiet and she'd needed somewhere to be while she waited. And somehow the presence of a sleeping person's regular breathing was the most manageable thing in the building at 4 a.m. Wexler sat down across from her. She didn't have her tablet this time, just a small notebook, paper, which Olivia noted, and the expression of someone who has spent the last 2 hours in a room with a person who decided to cooperate. She talked, Olivia said. Not a question. She talked. Wexler opened the notebook. The full picture is going to take time to unpack legally, but the operational summary is this. Delia Ruiz has been passing medical information to an intermediary for approximately 19 months. She was recruited through a personal contact, someone she'd known before her time at this hospital, someone she trusted. She was told the information was being used by a private health analytics firm doing longitudinal outcome studies on military personnel routed through civilian facilities. She believed that? For the first 11 months, she says she had no reason not to. Wexler's voice was carefully without editorial. The compensation was structured to look like a consulting arrangement. The data requests were specific but not obviously sensitive. Aggregate outcome data, treatment protocols, nothing that had an obvious military intelligence application if you didn't know what you were looking for. When did she stop believing it? About 8 months ago. She started noticing patterns in the requests. Specific unit identifiers being referenced. Specific personnel codes that didn't match civilian record formats. She did some research. Figured out that the analytics firm didn't exist in any registered capacity she could find. Olivia looked at the sleeping Agosto. And she kept sending information anyway. She did. Wexler said it without judgment, which Olivia understood was deliberate. She says she was afraid. By that point, she understood she was in something she couldn't simply exit. The contact had become less collegial. She had some communications that she felt were implicit threats about what would happen if she stopped. Do you have those communications? She'd deleted them, but she'd printed 3 of them before deleting. She's kept them for 8 months in a locked box at her home. She's giving us consent to retrieve them. Olivia was quiet for a moment. She thought about Delia at the nurses' station, running checklists, being 3 steps ahead of everything. Thought about 12 years of emergency nursing and the specific competence of someone who had built their entire professional identity around taking care of people. Thought about what it felt like to be inside a situation you couldn't see all the edges of, doing things you knew were wrong because the cost of stopping felt unsurvivable. She didn't excuse it. She also didn't reduce it to something simple. What about the termination? She asked. Did she know about the pressure on Holt? No, she knew Solis had been pushing personnel changes. She'd overheard enough administrative conversation to understand there was internal pressure coming from the CFO's office. But she didn't know it was targeting you specifically, and she didn't know why. Wexler paused. When I told her why, A brief stop. She didn't take it well. I wouldn't expect her to. She's asking to speak with you. Olivia looked at her hands. They were steady. They'd been steady all night, through the helicopter, through Agosto, through finding Delia in the corridor. And the steadiness was not composure exactly. It was more like the body's commitment to function regardless of what the mind was doing with itself. "Not yet," she said. "Tell her, not yet." Wexler nodded. "Solis is in federal custody. Transport left 40 minutes ago." She made a notation in the notebook. It's complicated with Holt." "What kind of complicated?" "He received instructions from Solis over a period of approximately 8 months. The termination letter was the most recent, but there were others: staffing decisions, budget reallocations, the suppression of at least 2 incident reports that should have gone to the state medical board." Wexler looked up from the notebook. He followed those instructions, but his attorney, who arrived about an hour ago, which tells you something about how prepared he was for this possibility, is arguing that Holt didn't understand the operational purpose behind them, that he believed Solis had administrative authority, and that the instructions were internal management decisions. Does that defense hold? For some of it. Not all of it. Wexler closed the notebook. The incident reports are the problem for him. A physician suppressing mandatory reporting is not an administrative gray area. Olivia absorbed this. What happens to the hospital? That depends on what the next 72 hours look like. The board is going to be notified this morning. She looked at Olivia directly. There's going to be a conversation about interim leadership. The board has the authority to appoint on an emergency basis while the investigation completes. The fluorescent light in Bay 5 hummed. Agosto breathed. The monitor reported his heart beating in a regular, recovering rhythm. "That's not my problem tonight," Olivia said. "No," Wexler agreed. "Tonight, it isn't." Dawn came in the way desert dawns came, not gradually but suddenly, as though the sky had been holding out and then decided to commit. The light came through the eastern windows of the ER corridor in long, flat bars, hitting the linoleum and the supply carts and the marker board of Delia's handwriting. And Olivia was standing at the window when it happened, watching the color change from black to purple to the specific sharp gold that had no equivalent anywhere she'd lived before Mesa Flats. She'd been awake for 24 hours. She had not changed her clothes. Her left leg was the worst it had been in 2 years, and she'd accepted this the way you accepted weather. Not with equanimity, exactly, but with the recognition that fighting it used resources she needed for other things. Falco found her at the window. He stood beside her, and they looked at the dawn for a moment without either of them saying anything, and she had the particular feeling of standing next to someone who occupied the same professional world in a way that made silence a legitimate form of communication. "Briggs's CT came back clean," he said, "neurologically intact. He's going to have headaches for a while. He's going to tell poker stories for a while," she said. "He's never going to stop telling poker stories." A pause. "Okonkwo came through surgery. They're calling her critical but stable. She was always going to fight." "Yes." He put his hands in his pockets. "Reyes asked the ship nurses to pass along a message for you." "Which was?" He said, and I'm quoting directly, "Tell the nurse I knew she was right." Falco almost smiled. "We think he means about being okay. He's a little unclear on context still. He had a lot of medication in him," she said. "He did." He was quiet for a moment. "There's going to be a formal debrief. Military side. Separate from Wexler's process. Probably in the next 72 hours. Location to be determined." He turned to look at her. "Your input on the tactical medical decisions from last night is going to be part of the record." "I understand. You're also going to be asked about the protection envelope. About what you knew and when." He paused. "I'm sorry you weren't told." She looked at the dawn. "Was there a reason?" "Yes." "A good one?" "Defensible," he said, which was not the same thing, and they both knew it. She nodded. She didn't push it further because pushing it further right now led somewhere she didn't have the bandwidth to go. The long conversation about what it meant that the people who'd been keeping her safe had done so in a way that kept her outside the decision, that treated her location and her life as operational variables to be managed rather than a person with the capacity to understand and choose. That conversation was real, and it needed to happen, and it was not happening at dawn after 24 hours awake with her leg in this condition. "There's something else," Falco said. She waited. "The broker. The external firm Wexler identified." He took a breath, and she noticed the breath because Falco did not take unnecessary breaths any more than he said unnecessary words. And so a breath meant something. We've been working a parallel track on the broker's identity for 6 weeks. Not who operates the firm, but who owns it. The ownership structure was layered through 3 shell formations, which took time to unpack. Wexler mentioned a breach above Solis's level, she said. Yes. He pulled out his phone, turned it toward her. On the screen was a photograph, a headshot, institutional format, the kind that appeared on organizational websites and in professional directories. The broker's holding company traces to this individual. She looked at the photograph. She had never seen this face in person. She had never worked with this person directly. But she knew the name beneath the photograph, and she knew the organizational affiliation listed beneath the name, because the affiliation was one she knew well, had worked within, had trusted, had built a significant portion of her adult professional identity inside of. He's a contractor, she said slowly. DOD adjacent. He's worked with 3 different agencies over the past 12 years. She looked at Falco. Including ours. Yes, Falco said. For how long? She said. How long has he been running the broker operation? We estimate 4 years. She absorbed this. 4 years. She ran the timeline backward. 4 years ago was 2 years before her separation, which was still within the period of her active service. Which meant the information flowing through this broker during those first 2 years hadn't just been about civilian hospital patients, hadn't just been about operational routes and personnel outcomes. What was he selling before he started using civilian medical facilities? She asked. Falco's jaw set. That's the part the investigation is still building. But you have a theory. We have evidence, he said carefully. Not complete. Enough to have escalated to the Inspector General's office 6 weeks ago. He took the phone back. You should know. The IG's office has been running parallel to Wexler's investigation. They're not the same process. Who on the IG side is running it? He told her. She knew the name. She knew the name well, had testified in front of this person's office on an unrelated matter 4 years ago, had found them to be thorough in a way that she'd respected. If the IG's office had this case, it was being taken seriously in a way that administrative investigations sometimes weren't. This is bigger than Suncrest Valley, she said, considerably. And last night, she worked through it. Last night was not just an extraction operation routing through Mesa Flats. Someone used the operational window to push for confirmation that the broker's asset inside this hospital was still active. They wanted to know if Delia was still sending. The transmission she made tonight, the patient records, was not requested. She sent it on her own because she panicked when she saw the FBI come in. Falco put the phone away. But the timing created useful information for whoever monitors those transmissions. It confirmed the asset was still operational, which confirms that they didn't know we were watching the channel, which is information the broker now has, she said, because Delia's transmission told them the FBI is here, told them the operation came through Mesa Flats, and told them that anyone who was involved is now in federal proximity. Yes. So they're going to move. They're already moving, Falco said. Wexler knows. The IG team knows. There are people in positions to respond to that movement. But it changes the timeline. It changes the timeline. She turned away from the window. The dawn was fully established now. The desert outside was visible in detail, the scrub and the flat distance and the specific austere beauty of a landscape that did not ask to be beautiful and was anyway. She'd driven into this landscape 3 years ago and stopped because she'd run out of reasons not to. She had reasons now. That was the difference. She had the shape of something she hadn't had then. Not resolution. The situation was nowhere near resolution, but direction. The compass bearing of a person who understands what they're looking at. I want to talk to Delia, she said. Falco looked at her. Wexler said you weren't ready. Wexler was right an hour ago, she said. I'm telling you what I want now. But Delia was sitting at the conference room table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched and her hands flat on the table surface. And when Olivia came in, she looked up with the expression of someone who has been waiting for something they're not sure they deserve. Olivia sat down across from her. She didn't say anything immediately. She let the silence exist between them without trying to manage it, because she'd learned that the impulse to fill silence was usually about your own discomfort, and her discomfort right now was not the most important thing in the room. How long were you scared? Olivia asked. Delia looked at her hands. 8 months. Why didn't you come to me? A long pause. Because I didn't know who you were. She looked up. And I mean that literally. I knew you as Olivia Marsh, supply nurse. I didn't know. I had no way of knowing what you actually were. And the person who recruited me when I started to have doubts told me that people at this hospital were not who they seemed, that I shouldn't trust anyone on the staff. She exhaled. I don't know if they knew about you specifically, but they made me afraid of everyone. That's how it works, Olivia said. That's what isolation does. I know that now. Delia's voice cracked slightly, and she controlled it. I've known it professionally for years. I counsel patients on it all the time, the recognition pattern. It's very different when you're inside it. Yes, Olivia said. It is. The people who got hurt tonight, Delia stopped. The Marines. They're going to be okay. All of them. If the information I passed had been used to... She couldn't finish it. It wasn't, Olivia said. I don't know that the things you passed weren't harmful. I can't tell you that yet because I don't know the full picture of what was done with them. But tonight those Marines came here and tonight they were treated. And tonight they're on a ship and the ones who came closest to dying made it. Delia nodded. She pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose and breathed. The FBI is going to need everything you can give them, Olivia said. Every contact, every communication you remember, every data request, all of it. And it's going to be uncomfortable and long, and you're going to need a lawyer who knows federal whistleblower provisions. Wexler mentioned those provisions. Good. Make sure your lawyer knows them too. Olivia looked at her directly. What you did was wrong, Delia. I need to say that because I think you need to hear me say it without softening. But what you're doing now is right. And what happened to you? The recruitment, the isolation, the implicit threats, those aren't justifications, but they're context. And context matters legally and otherwise. Delia looked at her for a long moment. Are you forgiving me? I'm not there yet, Olivia said honestly. I'm telling you the situation. The feelings are going to take longer. That's fair, Delia said. That's very fair. Olivia stood up. Her leg protested immediately, and she let it, moving toward the door with the particular managed gait of someone who has made peace with imperfection. Olivia, Delia's voice was quiet. I really did think you were just a supply nurse. For 3 years I thought that. I'm sorry that part wasn't true. Not because of what it means for me, but because I think it was lonely. Being something you couldn't say. Olivia had her hand on the door. She stood there for a moment, not moving. Letting that land in the part of her that registered true things, even when they arrived from unexpected directions. It was, she said. And then she opened the door and walked out. By 7 in the morning, the hospital had begun the process of becoming itself again. Patients were being routed through the ER on the standard morning intake pattern. The Marines had reduced their presence to 2 personnel, both stationed at the exterior in civilian equivalents that wouldn't alarm the incoming day shift. The surgical wing was running its first elective of the morning, a scheduled procedure that had been cleared to proceed because stability was its own kind of message, and the hospital was stable. Wexler found her in the parking lot. Olivia was sitting on the hood of her truck, which she hadn't returned to since the previous morning, which felt like a different geological era, with both legs stretched out and her eyes on the middle distance where the desert ran flat to the mountains. It was not comfortable. She was beyond caring about comfortable. Wexler stopped beside the truck. I have an update. I know, Olivia said. You wouldn't come out to a parking lot at 7 in the morning if you didn't. Wexler almost smiled. The technical team finished processing Solis's drive. And? The financial architecture he was maintaining was a conduit. Not just the broker, there are 3 additional receiving structures. The money was moving through a set of accounts registered to a series of medical consulting firms, which then distributed to individuals. She paused. Including 1 individual currently serving in a senior administrative capacity at the Office of the Inspector General. Olivia looked at her. Not the officer running the Suncrest investigation, Wexler said quickly. A different division, but the IG involvement means we now have a compromise inside the oversight structure, which changes the legal chain for every piece of evidence we've gathered. Because if there's IG corruption, the investigation's integrity gets challenged. Everything gets challenged, Wexler said. We need to transfer the evidence chain to a clean track, which is being done as of 40 minutes ago, We've notified DOJ directly, bypassing the compromised IG division. But it means the timeline extends. It means this is not going to wrap in 72 hours. I didn't think it was going to wrap in 72 hours, Olivia said. No. Wexler looked at her steadily. There's a formal request being prepared. From the Joint Operations Oversight Committee, cross-referenced with DOJ, they want you to provide a formal advisory statement, not witness testimony, advisory. Your background makes you relevant to several specific threads. The contractor, Olivia said, the one who owns the broker. That and others. A pause. It would mean being visible. Officially. On record as who you actually are, in a context where that record becomes public through the legal process. Olivia looked at the mountains. They were sharp-edged in the morning light, in the way that mountains in desert were sharp-edged. No atmospheric softening, just clear geometry against blue sky. She'd been looking at those mountains for 3 years from various angles and distances. She'd never decided if she found them beautiful or just large. When do they need an answer, she asked. Soon. Wexler reached into her jacket and produced an envelope, actual paper, which, like the notebook, was a specific choice about what left a record where. This is the formal request documentation. You don't have to read it now. Olivia took the envelope. She did not open it. She held it in her hands and felt its weight. Not heavy, just present. The specific weight of a piece of paper that was also a choice, that was also a direction, that was also the end of a particular kind of quietness she'd been living inside for 3 years. There's one more thing, Wexler said. She'd been saying that all night, each time it had been true. The board of Suncrest Valley Medical Center is convening an emergency meeting at 9 this morning. Wexler's voice was carefully neutral. I've spoken with the board chair. The agenda includes the suspension of Dr. Holt pending the outcome of the investigation, the administrative review of Solis's position, which is moot given his arrest, but the formal process has to happen, and a review of personnel actions taken in the last 90 days. A pause. That includes your termination. Olivia looked at her. The board chair asked me if you would be present, Wexler said. The parking lot was quiet. Somewhere inside the hospital, a PA system announced a routine page. 2 nurses were walking to their cars at the end of a night shift, talking in the easy, tired way of people who have done a hard job and are processing the end of it. Normal morning, normal hospital, nothing that would tell you, from the outside, what had happened inside it during the night. She looked down at the envelope in her hands. Then she heard footsteps behind her and turned. Gunnery Sergeant Falco was crossing the parking lot at a pace that was not his operational pace. Faster. His phone was at his ear, and his expression, which she had learned to read over the last 12 hours in the same way she read monitors and vital signs, was doing something it hadn't done all night. He lowered the phone, looked at her, then at Wexler, then back at her. Raven 1, he said, and the register of his voice, the specific, weighted way he used the call sign, told her before he said the next words that whatever was coming was not a continuation of the things she'd been managing. It was something else, something that sat outside the frame of everything she'd built her understanding of this night around. The contractor, Falco said. The one who owns the broker. Yes. He's in Mesa Flats. The parking lot tilted slightly in her perception. Not literally, just the way reality shifted when information arrived that changed the structural load-bearing elements of what you'd been standing on. She got off the hood of the truck, both feet on the ground. Since when? Wexler asked sharply. Our surveillance team picked him up 20 minutes ago. He drove in on the county route from the east, which is why we didn't catch him on the highway cameras. Falco's jaw was tight. He's outside this facility. He's been sitting in a vehicle 200 meters north of the main entrance for 17 minutes. Wexler was already on her phone. Falco was looking at Olivia with an expression she couldn't fully categorize, professional, and underneath that, something else. He's not just here because the operation came through, he said. He knows we identified him. He knows the broker's ownership structure was pulled from Solis's drive. He paused. He came here because of you, specifically. He wants to know what I've told you, she said. That's our read. Or, she said slowly, because something else was assembling itself in her mind. The pattern recognition system firing in the way it fired when something wasn't adding up to what it appeared to be. He wants something I have, something he thinks I have that he can't let the investigation access. Falco looked at her. What would that be? She thought about the 12 years before Mesa Flats, about the operation she'd been part of, the things she'd seen, the people she'd worked alongside, including people she now understood she hadn't fully understood, about the specific operational knowledge she carried in her memory that had never been formally recorded because parts of it were not recordable through formal channels, about one particular operation, one particular Tuesday, the one she tried not to count the minutes of. She looked at Falco. I think, she said carefully, that there's something he believes I know about that Tuesday, about how his involvement with our unit started and what it looked like at the beginning, before any of us understood what we were looking at. She paused. I think he's been watching me for 26 months, not just to monitor the protection envelope. He's been watching me because I'm the last person with direct operational memory of the thing that started all of this. Falco's face confirmed it without saying anything. Wexler finished her call. She turned back to them with the specific containment of a person who has just received information that has significantly altered her operational picture. He's still there, 200 meters north. She looked at Olivia. We are going to approach and detain. You are going to stay... No, Olivia said. Colonel Marsh, he came here because of me, she said. If you approach without me, he runs. You know that. Whatever he came here to do, he's not going to do it with federal agents and Marines standing between us. She held Wexler's gaze. But he'll talk to me, because I'm the thing he came for, and because he doesn't know yet that I understand what I am to him. Wexler looked at Falco. Falco looked at Olivia. You're 24 hours awake, and your leg, Wexler started. My leg is my problem, Olivia said. What's your answer? The morning light was gold and flat, and the mountains were exactly where they'd always been, and 200 meters north, in a vehicle she hadn't seen yet but would recognize when she did, was the person who had spent 4 years building a structure around a single event on a single Tuesday, and somewhere in the part of her that was tired and aching and profoundly done with this day, she understood that everything that was going to happen next depended on whether she could walk toward that vehicle and make him believe she had come alone. She walked north. She didn't limp less than she had. She didn't walk faster than her leg allowed. She walked at the pace that was available to her, which was not a performance of strength and was not an apology for the absence of it. Just a woman crossing a parking lot in desert morning light, moving toward a vehicle she could now see. A dark gray SUV, rental plates, parked on the access road shoulder in the particular way of someone who wanted to be visible enough to be found and anonymous enough to deny purpose. She could feel Wexler's people positioning behind her without looking. That was part of the arrangement. Wexler had agreed in the compressed negotiation of 3 minutes in a parking lot to hold her team at a distance that looked like absence while being the opposite. Falco was somewhere she couldn't see, which meant he was exactly where he needed to be. This was the specific kind of trust that had nothing to do with feeling trusting and everything to do with operational necessity, and she extended it fully because she didn't have a choice, and because the alternative was worse. 200 meters felt longer than it was. Her leg felt every meter. She didn't stop. The SUV's window came down when she was 30 feet out. The man inside was watching her in the rearview mirror and had been watching her since she cleared the parking lot edge. She'd felt the quality of that attention across the distance, the specific weight of being assessed by someone who was very good at it and knew it. His name was Victor Callard. She knew more about him now than she'd known an hour ago, which was itself more than she'd known for 26 months, which was itself more than she'd been allowed to know on the Tuesday that had organized the rest of her life. He was 55. He had the CV of a man who'd moved between defense contracting, intelligence consulting, and private security architecture for 3 decades, always at the edges of institutional structures, always with the specific kind of adjacency that gave him access without accountability. He had 2 phones, both encrypted. He had connections in 4 agencies that Falco could name, and probably more that he couldn't. He had, according to Solis's Drive, received payments totaling over $4 million across 14 accounts over 4 years for information that had resulted in at least 2 compromised operations, 1 blown extraction, and a Tuesday that Olivia would never stop counting the minutes of, even though she'd told herself she'd stopped. She reached the vehicle. She stopped. He looked at her through the open window. He was unremarkable in the way that the most dangerous people were unremarkable. Average height, gray at the temples, the kind of face that was easy to forget in a crowd. He'd built a career on that quality. She understood it because she'd spent 3 years cultivating a version of the same invisibility. "Colonel Marsh," he said. "I'm not a colonel anymore," she said. "You know that. Old habits." He looked at her with the assessment she'd felt from 30 feet. Up close, it was more precise. The specific evaluation of someone who is deciding how much danger is present and calculating his options relative to it. "You look tired." "Long night," she said. "You know about the night." "I know some of it." "I think you know most of it." She put her hand on the doorframe. Not aggressive, just present, establishing that she was not positioned to run, which told him that she wasn't afraid, which was information she needed him to have. "What I'm trying to understand is why you drove to Mesa Flats at 5 in the morning instead of putting distance between yourself and what happened here." He looked at her for a moment. "Maybe I wanted to talk. To me specifically. To you specifically. That's a significant risk for someone in your position." "I've been managing significant risks for 30 years, he said. "You do it long enough, you develop a tolerance." He looked at the desert, at the mountains, at the specific quality of morning that existed in this part of the world and nowhere else exactly. "I've been watching you for 26 months. "I know," she said. "Falco told me." "Did he tell you why?" "He told me some of it." She looked at him directly. "Tell me the rest." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him calculating. Not whether to talk, she realized, because he'd come here to talk. He'd driven through the desert at 5 in the morning because he needed to say something to someone, and she was the specific someone. And whatever else was true about Victor Callard, this was true. He was a man who had arrived at the end of a long road and found it wasn't where he'd expected it to go. "The Tuesday," he said. "Yes," she said. "What do you remember?" "Everything," she said. "I've told myself for 2 years that I've stopped counting the minutes. I haven't stopped." Something moved in his face. The operation that went wrong that day, the thing that turned it from training into something else, wasn't an accident. He said it with the flatness of someone who has rehearsed this and found that rehearsal didn't make it easier. The route compromise, the timing. Someone told the other side where you were going to be. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You knew?" "I suspected. I didn't have evidence. I understood that what happened was too specifically targeted to be random, but I didn't have a name and I didn't have a mechanism." She held his gaze. "Was it you?" The question landed in the morning air between them. He didn't look away. She gave him credit for that. Whatever he was, he didn't look away from the direct version of the thing. "Not directly," he said. "I sold information about operational scheduling to a brokerage I thought was a foreign intelligence aggregator doing commercial intelligence work. I didn't know what it was being used for. I didn't know the specific operation it touched until after." "But you knew after." "Yes." "And you kept operating." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. The weight of a man who had told himself the story of his own choices in a particular way for a long time, and was now in the presence of someone who needed a different story, a truer one. "Yes," he said. "I kept operating." She absorbed that. Not the way she absorbed operational information, quickly, purposefully, slowly. The way you absorbed the thing you'd been trying not to know, because knowing it required you to hold the full size of it. 7 people went into that ambush because of what you sold, she said. 4 of them walked out. 2 of them didn't walk out at all. And She stopped. She did not finish that sentence because finishing it was not what this moment required. "You've been watching me for 26 months. To make sure you were safe," he said, and she heard in his voice the specific quality of a man who knows how that sounds and says it anyway because it's the only true thing he has left. "You watched me to make sure you were safe," she said, "because I was the variable, the surviving witness with operational memory who might eventually connect what she knew to a name she hadn't been given." "Both," he said. Both things were true. She didn't argue the point. It didn't matter now whether he'd convinced himself his surveillance of her was protective. What mattered was what happened next, and what happened next was not her decision. It was the decision of the people positioned in the distance behind her, who had been listening to every word of this conversation through the receiver Falco had attached to her vest, 200 meters south of here. "Victor," she said, and she used his first name deliberately because she needed him to stay present, and first names kept people present. There are federal agents 40 meters behind me. You knew they were there when you agreed to have this conversation. He looked at the mirror. Yes. You drove here knowing that. Yes. Then you didn't come here to run, she said. You came here to give me something because you know that the evidence trail from Solis's drive leads to you. And you know the IG compromise is going to add years in complexity to the legal process. And you have something that would shortcut that process in a way that serves your interests more than a decade of litigation. He reached into his jacket, slowly, very slowly, with the specific deliberateness of someone who understands the nature of the people watching him from 40 meters back and wants very badly to not be shot in a desert access road at 7 in the morning. What he produced was not a weapon. It was a drive. Small, matte black, nondescript. The kind of thing that looked like nothing. 4 years of records, he said. Full broker architecture. Every transaction, every receiving account, every contact, every operation it touched. He paused. Including the ones before Tuesday, including how the whole structure started and who it started with. She looked at the drive. Who else is on it? She asked. People with institutional authority in 4 agencies, he said. People whose names are going to cause significant problems for significant institutions when they come out. He held the drive in the space between them. I'm not a good person, Colonel Marsh. I've known that for a long time. But I have an excellent memory for documentation, and I've kept records because records are the only currency that lasts when everything else collapses. His hand was steady. This is what I came here to give you, not to Wexler, not to Falco, to you, because you're the one who's owed it. She looked at his face. She looked at the drive. She looked at the morning sky over the desert, which was doing nothing to help her make this decision. She thought about what it meant to accept something from the person whose choices had organized her loss. To take the instrument of his cooperation from his hand and carry it back to the people behind her who would use it to dismantle what he'd built. She thought about whether that felt like justice or like the practical management of an imperfect situation. She decided that sometimes those were the same thing, and that needing them to be different was a luxury she couldn't afford. She took the drive. What happened after that was not a single moment. It was a sequence of moments, each unremarkable in itself, and collectively constituting the kind of change that takes years to understand fully. Wexler's team came forward when she turned and held up the drive. They moved with the efficiency she'd come to expect from them. Professional, no theater, just the systematic process of taking custody of a person and evidence in the correct procedural sequence. Collard got out of the vehicle without being asked to. He put his hands where they needed to be. He said nothing additional. She watched them work and felt the specific quality of a situation that had found its resolution. Not clean, because resolution in the real world was never clean, but complete. The shape of it was visible now in the way that shapes became visible after you'd been inside them for long enough. The 4 years of Callard's operation, the 19 months of Delia's fear, the 3 years of her own invisible life, the 26 months of watching and being watched, all of it connected through a timeline that traced back to a Tuesday that had happened before any of this. That was the origin point of everything, that she had carried alone because no one had told her she was carrying it in the same direction as a federal investigation and a military protection operation, and the slow, incremental work of people who were trying to dismantle something large and difficult. She hadn't been alone. She hadn't known she wasn't alone, which was its own complicated thing. The loneliness had been real even if the isolation hadn't been total. She was going to have feelings about that for a long time, and she was not going to resolve them this morning in a desert parking lot. Falco appeared beside her. He looked at her with the expression she'd come to read as his version of relief, which was minimal in its visible components and very real underneath. Good, he said. It's a start, she said. It's more than a start. He looked at where Wexler's team was completing the custody process. The drive, if it contains what he says, it contains more than he said, she told him. He's been keeping records for 4 years. That's not a person who built an exit strategy last night. That's a person who built one the day he understood what he was inside. She paused. He just needed a reason to use it. Falco looked at her. You, me, she said, or the version of me he'd been watching for 26 months, Whatever story he told himself about what he owed me. Does it matter what story he told himself? She considered this. No, she said. The drive is real regardless. The board meeting at 9 o'clock was not what she'd expected, which was that it would be formal and procedural and carefully managed by people who were primarily concerned with institutional liability. It was those things. It was also, beneath those things, something rawer and more human than institutional processes typically permitted. There were 11 board members present. The chair, a woman named Margaret Solano, who had been running the board for 7 years, and who had, Wexler had informed Olivia, been entirely outside the Solis financial arrangement, one of the few administrative figures at Suncrest Valley who had been genuinely unaware, opened the meeting and moved through the preliminary business with the brisk authority of someone who understands that speed is its own form of dignity in difficult circumstances. Holt's administrative suspension was voted in the first agenda item. Unanimous. He was not present in the room. The formal separation of Solis from his position, as a prelude to the criminal process already in motion, was the second item, also unanimous, also fast. The third item was Olivia's termination. Solano looked at her directly when she brought it to the table, which Olivia respected. Not through an attorney, not through emotion, not through the formal language alone, with eye contact. The personnel action dated 3 days prior, designating the end of employment for Olivia Marsh, was influenced by external pressure originating from the CFO's office and connected to a federal investigation that has since been made known to this board. She said it clearly, without softening. This board is moving to rescind that action and expunge it from Ms. Marsh's employment record. The vote was not unanimous this time. It was 10-1, which Olivia found more honest than unanimity would have been, because 10-1 meant the room was real, that there was a person in it who had a reservation or a principle or a liability concern that made them vote differently, and a room with one dissent was a room that was thinking rather than performing. She did not ask who dissented. When Solano looked at her and said, "Ms. Marsh, the board would like to formally acknowledge the circumstances of last night and the circumstances of your service to this institution over the past 3 years," Olivia said, the only thing that felt true. "Thank you." 2 words, not elaborate, not performed. Solano nodded. She moved to the next agenda item, which was the appointment of interim leadership pending the investigation's completion. And this was the point at which Olivia became a functional part of the conversation rather than the subject of it, which was where she'd always been most comfortable. Well, she didn't return to the floor that day. She went home at 10 in the morning in the full light of a desert day that had no interest in the events of the previous 18 hours. And she stood in her flat-roofed rental house and looked at the cardboard box from her locker that was sitting on the kitchen counter where she'd left it the day before, and she took the photograph out of it. 6 people in desert camo, brutal sun. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about the 2 who weren't walking anymore. She thought about their names, which she knew and would always know, which she said quietly, in the privacy of her own kitchen, not as a ritual, but as an acknowledgement, not letting the morning go by without them being real in it. She thought about Reyes, who was going to be okay, and who had gripped her wrist like a question waiting for an answer. She thought about Okonkwo, who had looked at her with dark, clear eyes and said, "How bad," and taken the answer without flinching. She thought about Briggs and his poker story, and Agosto asking where his team was, and Torres standing at her shoulder with his hands learning. She thought about Delia, sitting in the conference room with her hands flat on the table. She wasn't there yet on forgiveness. She was somewhere before it, in the territory of understanding, which was not the same thing and was not a lesser thing. Understanding didn't require forgiveness to be real. Forgiveness would or wouldn't come on its own schedule. She put the photograph on the counter face up. She showered. She ate real food, not from reserves, not as fuel, but as a person eating a meal because they were hungry and it was morning and they were alive. She sat at her kitchen table with coffee and felt the specific quality of a day that had no operational demands on it, which was a quality she hadn't felt in 24 hours, in which her body received like water on dry ground. She slept for 4 hours. When she woke up, there were 3 messages on her personal phone. One from Wexler. Brief, informational, the drive confirmed as containing everything Callard had indicated and considerably more. Technical analysis ongoing. She would be in touch. One from Falco. Shorter, 2 sentences, which in Falco's economy was practically a speech. Okonkwo's surgeon says she's going to make a full recovery. Thought you'd want that before the day was out. One from a number she didn't recognize, which turned out to be Torres, who had somehow gotten her number from someone in the chain and texted only, "Thank you for last night. I'm going to be better because of it." She read all 3. She didn't respond immediately to any of them. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the afternoon light coming through the window and let herself feel what was in the room. It was not simple. None of it was simple. The drive, the investigation, the board meeting, Delia Callard, the Tuesday that had started all of it, the 26 months of a life she'd been living as half of herself. None of it resolved into something clean and emotionally manageable. What she felt was not triumph, not relief, not the earned peace of a person who had finished a hard thing. What she felt was the complicated texture of a person who had survived something and was now standing on the other side of it, still carrying most of the weight, but carrying it in daylight instead of in the dark. That was the difference. Daylight didn't make the weight less. It made the weight visible, which meant it was real in a different way. Not a secret thing she managed alone, but a thing that existed in the shared world where other people could see it and acknowledge it, and where, sometimes, someone helped you carry part of it. She'd spent 3 years believing that invisible was safe, that the version of herself that managed supply closets and caught errors in the margins and never asked to be seen was the most sustainable shape to live in. And it had been sustainable. She'd been competent in it, even. But competence in a small life was not the same as living in your actual size. And she'd known that every morning she strapped on the brace and walked through the doors of a place that saw her as dead weight. She had not been dead weight. She had never been dead weight. She'd been the thing the building didn't know it had until the moment it needed it. She went back to the hospital on Thursday, not as a supply nurse. The logistics of her formal reinstatement were still in process, a multi-step procedure that Wexler's involvement had complicated in ways the HR department was visibly struggling with. She went back as a person who had unfinished business, and as someone who understood that some things required your physical presence to resolve. She found Torres first. He was in the break room, off shift, in the specific state of a young person who has not fully slept and has been running on the adrenaline of having done something real. He looked up when she came in, and his expression did the thing that people's expressions did when they were surprised by something they'd hoped for. "How's Agosto?" she asked. "Discharged this morning," Torres said. He walked out. He made a point of walking out without the wheelchair, even though his nurse wanted him to use it. "Sounds about right," she said. "He left something for you?" Torres produced a folded piece of paper that had clearly been folded and unfolded several times. She opened it. It was a note, handwritten, brief. "I heard you were a supply nurse. I don't believe that. Whatever you are, thank you. Agosto." She folded it back up. She put it in her pocket. "What are you going to do?" Torres asked. "With the position here, and the investigation, and all of—" He gestured broadly at the concept of everything. "All of it?" "I don't know the full shape of it yet," she said. "The advisory work for DOJ is going to take time. The military debrief is next week." She looked at him. "But I'll be here, in some capacity. This is where I'm needed right now, and I've learned not to argue with that." He nodded. "I want to tell you something." He said it with the particular deliberateness of someone who has been composing a sentence for 2 days. "When you were working on the aircraft, on the transit, you made mistakes, small ones, and you caught them, but I saw you make them, and I thought you'd—" He stopped. "I thought you'd be perfect, given everything." "Nobody's perfect," she said. That's not what competence is." "I know that now," he said. "Watching you catch your own mistakes and correct them without stopping, that was more useful to me than watching someone who didn't make any." He paused. "I'm going to remember that." "Good," she said. "Remember it when you make yours." "What?" She found Wexler in the corridor outside the administrative wing at noon. Wexler had the look of someone in the mid-stage of a large investigation, neither the initial urgency nor the final resolution, just the sustained, disciplined work of building a case that would hold under every legal pressure it was going to face. She had a tablet and a coffee and the kind of competent tiredness that didn't slow her down. "The drive," Olivia said. "The drive," Wexler confirmed. 23 named individuals, 4 agencies. The financial architecture goes back 6 years, not 4. Callard underreported his timeline by 2 years, possibly because he was trying to keep a portion of the earlier records as leverage, possibly because he's been lying for so long he's genuinely lost track. She looked at her tablet. The Tuesday operation is fully documented. The route compromised, the information sold, the chain of payments. It's all there. That's prosecutable? Very, Wexler said. The challenge is the institutional reach. When you have named individuals at this level inside 4 agencies, the question of who oversees the prosecution becomes itself a political problem. We're working with DOJ directly, with the IG office that's clean, and with the Joint Congressional Oversight Committee that was briefed this morning. This morning? At 7, Wexler said. Washington is aware. Has been since 6 a.m. She looked at Olivia. Your name is in the briefing materials. Not in a way that requires you to do anything yet, but you should know. I know, she said. The advisory request stands, Wexler said. Your response when you're ready. I'll be ready by Monday, Olivia said. Wexler nodded. She started to move, stopped, turned back, and this was the only moment in the entire 4 days that Olivia saw something unguarded in Dana Wexler's expression, something that existed outside the professional competence and the operational control, just a person standing in a hospital corridor looking at another person. What you did on that aircraft, Wexler said, and in this building, and in the parking lot. She stopped. I'm just going to say that it mattered. All of it mattered. I know, Olivia said. Thank you for saying it anyway. She saw Delia on Friday, not at the hospital, at a coffee place on the edge of town that was the kind of place that existed in small desert cities as a neutral ground, belonging to no one, associated with nothing. Delia was already there when she arrived. She had coffee she was drinking this time, not ignoring, and she looked like a person who had slept, which was different from looking like a person who had resolved anything. Olivia sat down. They were quiet for a moment. The coffee place had 3 other customers and a soundtrack of indeterminate indie music and the specific atmosphere of a place that expected nothing from you. My lawyer says cooperative witnesses in federal cases of this size often see reduced or suspended charges, Delia said, depending on the value of the testimony and the good faith of the cooperation. That's accurate, Olivia said. I know. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I'm going to lose my nursing license. Even with the best outcome, the board's going to pull it. Transmission of patient records to an unauthorized party it doesn't matter what the circumstances were. The license is gone. Olivia said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wasn't both true and insufficient. 12 years, Delia said, not bitterly, just counting. I was good at it. You were excellent at it, Olivia said. That's also true. Both things are going to be true for a long time. Delia looked at her. Are we? She stopped. I don't know what word to use. Are we okay? Is that a possible thing right now? Not yet, Olivia said, but it's a possible thing eventually, I think. Delia nodded. She accepted that in the way of someone who had stopped asking for better than what was real. I'm glad you walked out to that parking lot, she said. I'm glad you were the one. Not because it helped me, because it was right that it was you. Olivia looked at her. Why? Because you know how to hold complicated things without crushing them, Delia said. I've watched you do it for 3 years. You were always the person in the room who made space for things to be complicated. She paused. I should have trusted that when I had the chance. That's what I'm going to spend a long time wishing I'd done differently. Olivia drank her coffee. Learn something from that, she said. Whatever comes next, learn that specific thing. It's the most useful thing a person can carry. Peace. 2 weeks later, she was in Washington. The DOJ briefing took 3 days and covered everything she'd carried in her memory for 4 years. The operational details of the Tuesday, the specific intelligence patterns she'd noticed in the months before it, that she'd reported through channels and which had, she now understood, been routed to people who had reasons not to act on them. She gave her testimony in a room with 7 attorneys and a stenographer and 2 representatives from the Joint Oversight Committee, and she gave it clearly and completely, and without the softening that comes from wanting to be liked or the defensiveness that comes from wanting to be protected. She said what she knew. She said what she'd suspected. She identified the distinction between those 2 categories carefully and maintained it throughout, because the difference between knowledge and suspicion was not a legal formality, it was the foundation of any account worth giving. The second day, one of the DOJ attorneys said, "You've been carrying this for 4 years." "Yes," she said, He stopped. "Without institutional support." "I had some support I didn't know about," she said, "but operationally, for the most part, yes. I want to apologize on behalf of—" "Don't," she said. Not rudely, just directly. Apologies on behalf of institutions aren't from the people who made the decisions. They feel good for the person saying them, and they don't help the person hearing them. What helps is making sure the decisions are different next time. She looked at him. "Is that what this process is designed to do?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly what it's designed to do." "Then that's enough," she said. The formal commendation came in a building in Virginia at the end of the month, in a room that was smaller and less ceremonial than such rooms were in the imagination, with approximately 20 people present and a general she'd met once before who had the specific quality of seniority that had been earned rather than climbed toward. She wore civilian clothes. She'd been asked if she wanted uniform protocol, and she'd said no, that she was a civilian, that the civilian version of this moment was the accurate one. The general had accepted that without pushing. The commendation cited the events of the single night, the helicopter transit, the casualties stabilized, the medical outcomes, the 22 Marines she'd treated across both waves, all of whom had survived. It cited her advisory contribution to the DOJ investigation. It used language that was formal and correct and somewhat inadequate to the full picture, which she expected because official language was always somewhat inadequate to the full picture. She stood and received it and said thank you, and meant it. Afterward, Falco found her in the corridor. "How does it feel?" he asked. She thought about the question honestly. "Like it should have happened differently," she said. "All of it. Not the commendation, the whole 26 months, the protection, the watching, the decision to keep me outside the information loop. It should have been different." "Yes," he said, "it should have. But it didn't happen differently. So this is the version that happened, and now I have to decide what to do with it." She looked at the commendation in her hand, a physical object, real and present. "I'm going to do something with it." "The advisory role," he said. "That," she said, "and something else." The DOJ briefing identified gaps in how civilian medical facilities interface with military extraction routes. The protocols are inadequate, the training for civilian medical staff is insufficient, and the intelligence about personnel being routed through those facilities is managed in a way that creates exactly the kind of vulnerability that CalArts exploited. She looked at him. "Someone should fix that." Falco looked at her with an expression that was not surprise. "Someone should," he said. "Someone with specific background in both clinical emergency medicine and military trauma operations," she said. "Someone who understands both sides of that interface from direct experience." "That's a narrow pool," he said. "It is," she agreed. She drove back to Mesa Flats, not because she was required to. The investigation had released her from the immediate obligations. The advisory work could be done remotely, and in Washington, her reinstatement at Suncrest Valley was technically complete, though the terms of her return were still being negotiated. She drove back because it was where she lived, and she wasn't ready to stop living there. The desert in October was the finest version of itself, the heat reduced to something bearable. The sky a hard, specific blue that she'd learned to recognize as the particular shade of a place that had no humidity to soften it. She came through the door of her flat-roofed rental house and set her bag down and looked at the photograph on the kitchen counter, which she'd left face up when she went to Washington. 6 people in desert camo. Brutal sun. She was in the center, straight-postured, easy. She left it face up. She went to the window and looked at the mountains. She'd been staring at those mountains for 3 years as though they were a wall. She understood now, or she was beginning to understand, which was the accurate thing to say, because understanding didn't arrive complete. It arrived in increments that accumulated over time, that they weren't a wall. They were just the edge of the visible part of a much larger landscape. Beyond them was more terrain, different terrain, terrain she hadn't seen yet. She was going to see it. Not because everything was fixed. The investigation would run for years. CalArts would spend those years in legal processes that would be complex and slow and would frustrate everyone involved. The 23 named individuals on the drive would fight the process with every resource available to them, which was considerable. Delia would rebuild her life in a shape she couldn't currently see the outline of. Torres would make his own mistakes on his own aircraft, in his own time, and would, she hoped, remember the things she'd told him about going back to the floor instead of the ceiling. Reyes was at home outside Tucson, healing. Okonkwo was in rehabilitation, which was going to be long, and the report said she was impatient with it, which the report said with the particular approval of medical professionals for patients who are fighting. Briggs had called, somehow, through Falco, who had given him her number with what she suspected was minimal deliberation, and had told her a poker story that had no obvious ending, and she'd listened to the whole thing, and he'd said at the end in a completely different register, "I heard what you did on that aircraft. I heard all of it. I want you to know that I know." "I know you know," she'd said. "Good," he said. And then he'd hung up, which was exactly right. That. She strapped the brace onto her leg on Monday morning. It was the same brace, same hallway, same drive to the same hospital, through the same flat desert geography, past the same scrub and the same fence posts and the same sky doing its particular thing with the October light. But she drove differently, not faster, not more easily. The leg was the leg. The road was the road. She drove with the specific quality of a person who has stopped keeping a secret, which was different from the quality of a person who never had one. The secret had shaped her for a long time. The shape of a person isn't erased when the thing that created it is gone. It becomes something else, the evidence of experience, the texture of a life that has been through something real and come out the other side still moving. She pulled into the parking lot. She took the visitor sticker from last week out of the cup holder and looked at it, and put it down and went in through the main entrance with no sticker and no badge, because she hadn't gotten the new one yet, and Ferris was at the desk, and he looked up and his expression was a version of every person she'd encountered in the last month who understood now what they'd been looking at for 3 years without seeing it. He didn't say anything elaborate. He nodded at her, the specific nod of acknowledgement that was not an apology and not a celebration, but something more plain and more honest than either of those, and she nodded back. She walked through the lobby. The emergency department in the early morning had its standard rhythm. 2 intakes from the overnight, a chest pain being assessed in Bay 2, Ferris's PA system page murmuring in the background. The smell of a hospital in morning light was its own specific compound. Antiseptic and coffee from the break room, and the particular dry quality of recirculated desert air. She knew this building. She knew where the floor unevenness was near the medication room. She knew the light switches in the supply corridor operated on a 3-second delay. She knew which elevator was slow and which attending physician had a habit of underdocumenting and which shift handoff time was when errors were most likely to occur. She'd learned all of that over 3 years of being invisible. That knowledge was still useful. It was useful in a different way now. Not something she carried alone and deployed quietly, but something that would become part of a system being rebuilt from a more honest foundation. She walked to the nurse's station. The morning charge nurse, a woman named Vega, who'd been on the floor for 8 years and who'd watched the last 2 weeks' events with the specific attention of someone who takes careful note of everything and says very little, looked up when she approached. "Morning?" Olivia said. "Morning," Vega said. And then, without making it a statement and without making it a ceremony, Bay 3's blood pressure monitoring is reading inconsistently. We think the cuff calibration is off, but we haven't had a chance to— "I'll check it," Olivia said. She went to check it. She had a limp. She had a brace. She had 24 years of accumulated knowledge in her hands and her memory and her instincts, some of it earned at terrible cost, all of it real. She was not the person she'd been before the Tuesday. She was not the person she'd been 3 years ago when she drove into Mesa Flats and stopped because she'd run out of reasons not to. She was the person who had been both of those people and who had walked through what happened between them and was still walking. That was the thing she wished someone had told her. Not at the beginning, because she couldn't have heard it then, but somewhere in the middle of the invisible years when she'd started to mistake invisibility for safety and safety for a life. The thing was this: the world will always find a way to use your smallness against you. It will hand you clipboards and supply closets and termination letters, and it will smile when it does it. And you will be tempted, God, you will be tempted, to become exactly as small as it insists you are, because small is quiet, and quiet feels like peace. But it isn't peace. It's just silence. And there is an enormous difference between a person who is quiet because they have nothing to say and a person who is quiet because they are choosing when to speak. The first kind shrinks. The second kind waits. She had waited long enough. She checked the blood pressure cuff. It was the calibration, a simple fix, the same kind of fix she'd been making for 3 years in this building, in the margins, without acknowledgement. She recalibrated it. She marked the issue in the system with her name attached, not anonymous, not in the margin, her name attached to the work she'd done, on the record where it belonged. Then she walked to the next thing. Outside, the desert morning was doing what it always did, expanding into a day that didn't ask permission from anyone and didn't explain itself. The mountains were exactly where they'd always been. The sky was its specific desert blue, the kind with no softness in it, just clarity. She had work to do. She did it.